What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's your boy Black Muse, JC Muse, aka the Black Muse. It's been a while. I've been out the way, been battling some sinus stuff. I don't know what's going on. You might be able to hear it in my voice, but we are back. We are live, and we are doing the damn thing. Go ahead and turn my intro, outro music down a little bit. All right. I got a special guest actually coming back live on the stream for the second time. A man that goes by the name Bro. Bro, you are live. How you doing, man?
What's up, man? Good to see you.
Stop trying to act cool, bro. Stop trying to act cool like you cooler than me or something. How's life been treating you?
I'm good, man. Busy. Doing shows. I'm a performer. So I sing all over the place, but and I'm also in the middle of getting out of the military. So
what do you do? Like are you in a band or something?
No, so I'm a solo artist. So I go and perform. I do corporate events. I do like regular gigs, private gigs, weddings, wedding parties. So I just get hired out to do events all over the place.
But you sing specifically?
Yes, I sing. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that. I mean, you being all cryptic and shit, like, oh, I'm a performer. I perform. Like, I don't know if you pole dance or what. I don't know what you do.
Yeah,
what genre?
I'm a national pole dancer now.
What music genre?
I cross 5 genres. So I do everything from Bob Marley to John Legend to Seal to Elvis Presley to Frank Sinatra to Amy Winehouse. So it's like everything pop to soul, a little bit of R&B, reggae, and country.
So, but you don't have a band because you're a solo artist, right?
Right.
Okay. So do you just play instrumentals and sing to them?
Yeah.
So you're
I have these tracks that I have, and I go set up. I have my whole equipment system and my microphone and everything, and just entertain. So I sing and dance. So I'm a performer. I don't just stand there sing. Anybody can do that, but yeah.
so you dance too?
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean, like Temptations?
Yeah, like choreographic dance. Like I have I have moves that I employ. Yeah.
Oh, you have moves. Okay.
Yeah, like think of like a professional artist in a concert. You know, they're not just standing there singing. They're moving around. They're engaging the crowd. That's really what I do. I engage the crowd when I sing.
Okay.
So,
all right. I never would have pegged you for a dancer.
I'll send you my website. You can check it out.
Oh, you got a website? Oh, you got a whole website. All right. Well, you heard it here on the Black Muse podcast. So is your stage name Bro too?
Yeah.
Really?
Everybody knows me as Bro. Yeah.
Okay.
It works out because like it's a unique name. It's my real name. Everybody always wonders like what my real name is after I tell them what my real name is. So I was like, you know what? Okay, if y'all want to play this game, we're gonna add it as my stage name too. So y'all can keep asking.
Y'all can just wonder about me. Okay. All right. That's interesting. That's super interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't know that about you, so that's cool. So how often do you perform?
Well, since I'm still in the military, I have to keep my schedule kind of open because I can't just perform every day. So right now I'm doing 3 days a week, sometimes 4. So I have like a regular gig, 2 regular gigs on Friday. I have a regular gig on Saturday. So I have a show tonight, and then I have a gig on every other Sunday. So that's kind of like the regular ones, but then I have like other random private gigs that I get hired to. So like I have a wedding on the 25th. I got another event on the 26th. And it just depends. Like people will reach out, and if I'm not busy doing army stuff, then sure, I'll avail myself. Or if I'm feeling like it. So
Are you on YouTube, bro?
not yet. I'm about to do that. I'm on Instagram more, but I'm about to start YouTube and primarily do shorts. And then once I start recording like full songs, I just started professional recording. So once I start dishing those out, then I'll put it on YouTube.
What's your
And,
website? I don't believe you have a website.
yeah, you can go to my name, bromahota.com.
Bro, how
So
you spell it?
yeah, let me put it in chat.
Bro.
MUHOTA.com. My man say you don't believe I got a website.
I don't believe you. I gotta see this for myself, bro. We're gonna have to put this on the stream, bro.
Yeah,
You
that's
got
fine.
videos on here?
Yeah, a little bit.
Oh shit, feel the vibe. Oh hell nah. This dude got a whole website, bro. Yeah, people on my stream need to see this shit. Hold on, wait a minute. We gonna get on the we gonna get a little shameless promo real quick because
You
bro
wild,
got a whole ass website, bro. Hold on. Look at my man feeling the vibe. Hey, where were you when you took that photo, bro?
I live here, so I took that picture in Carmel.
Carmel Valley. Book
Yeah.
me. About me. Hold on. Let me a little bit about me. You got a website. Check out my upcoming shows. Can I promo you real quick?
Sure.
All right. Upcoming shows. Tonight. Wait, no. Today's the 18th. Tonight, Edwin's Kaona.
Kauna,
Kaona.
yeah. It's a
Edwin's
Filipino restaurant.
Kaona.
Yeah.
Filipino restaurant. Carmel by the Sea, California. San Carlos Street. Be there, be square. Is this you singing? Are you
Yeah,
you
that's
got the
me.
bit? I
You
wanna
thought
like
that was a stock photo?
yeah, I really did,
That's
but
funny. No, that's me.
I thought it was gonna blow up the photo. It didn't
No,
blow
no,
it
no.
up. Bruh.
But you could look
Hold
at
on. Oh, you got the gallery? Hold on.
gallery of the book me, you'll see
We gonna explore this shit.
yeah.
Oh shit, you out here just doing your oh you really be Hey, you singing your ass off right now, bro.
You're funny, man.
That this is what you be doing. Yo, I never would have guessed it from Clubhouse, bro. You see it here. You see it here. Look at you. Is that you? You got your eyes closed. You I
Yeah,
don't know
that's
what
me.
song you singing, but you sweating this shit. Okay, you got a little. Oh, you play the guitar too,
Yeah, I play the guitar as well.
bro? I need to see some video footage, bro. This is not cutting it. This is not cutting it. You got it on Instagram. You got some videos.
Yeah, I got some videos on Instagram.
Hold on, we gonna have to. We gonna have to.
Oh my god. This guy.
Let's go to the gram, bro. Let's go to the gram. Let me see some
Holy
reels real
crap.
quick, bro. This gotta have it. Oh wait, is this are you performing on this one?
Just click the first reel, you'll see.
This one?
The first
No, I
one.
want to see. Okay, this one right here. I want to see you actually sing it. All right, here we go. Hopefully.
Okay. Yeah. Whichever one.
Are you really singing? Are you just lip
Yeah.
syncing?
That's me singing. That's Prince.
Are you hitting the falsettos right now?
Yeah. That's Purple Rain. So
Are
that's
you
back
really
when
out
I
here
used to,
singing Purple Rain, bro?
yeah, man. So that's when I used to do karaoke. I used to do that a lot. And that's kind of how I decided to do it like professionally and just take music a little bit more serious. Because everybody was like, dude, why don't you just like start singing? And then I got requested to start singing at my first gig. That's how I got my first gig. I haven't actually done any like marketing of me going to a place and say, hey, can I sing here? They've come to me because they heard me on my first spot, where I also got introduced, and then they had me start singing there every week, and then I meet new people every week, and I get gigs from there. I get other places I play regularly from. So, but yeah,
Is this you trying to duck right here?
no, that's not me trying. That's me doing it.
Man, let me see this shit. I don't believe this shit.
It's when I lived in Germany.
Man, you think man, you ain't shit. All right. All right, let me see another one.
That's my buddy Johan. He was on The Voice in Mexico.
Oh, you got some fat. You got some. You got some fat girl. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hey. What is this? A wedding? What is this?
Nah, bro.
Is this at a
this
restaurant?
this a typical restaurant night.
Are you ad libbing this?
You got
Are
to,
you
man.
you jamming, bro? Hey, I don't believe this, bro. I don't fucking believe this shit. Are you playing the piano too?
I don't play, but I learned how to play it, man.
I can't stop singing it's ringing. I can't believe what I'm watching, bro. I can't believe this shit. You are so fucking monotone on the app. It's crazy.
That's my friend Johan. I just recorded him.
Oh, okay. I thought you was gonna show up.
Yeah.
Are you working out with it? What is this? A workout regimen? You?
Oh, that's when
Maybe.
I was in Switzerland, and it was just a nice morning to do a little run workout. So that's when I sang in the army. I was a lead vocalist in the army for a couple years.
All right, bro. I've had enough of this. I can't stand your ass right now, bro. Are you really out here
No, that's my twin.
trying to be all American? You trying to be a? Let me see this last. Let me see this last little dunk. Man, quit trying to act like you did something. You ain't do shit, bro. All right, bro. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, my man bro got a website. He say book him though. Bro,
Yeah.
oh man, that's cool though. Low key, that's cool. That's tight. Good for you.
Thank you, man.
It fundamentally and radically changes how I think of you from now on, bro.
You
From
thought I
now
was
on, if
just,
I ever see you, bro,
political
dude,
guy
I
on
didn't know,
Clubhouse.
I didn't know you had all these hidden talents, bro. I didn't know you had them, bro. I didn't know you had it in you, so that was kind of cool.
Yeah, man.
But yeah, you you actually out here trying to be a showman. You was throwing your hands around. You was feeling what you was singing. You was you
Oh, my.
you was bellowing and shit. You was hitting falsettos.
Hey, man, you got to hit them notes, man. Sometimes them
Hey,
notes
do
don't
your
come out
thing.
if you don't do that. You know what I'm
That's
saying? So,
crazy. All right,
yeah.
well, you heard it here. I got the man, I got the man, bro, live on the stream, performer, professional dunker, lead singer for the army, all that shit. That's cool. All right. Well, that was actually cool to just explore real quick, just because we extended the fraternizing part. But let's awkwardly
Fraternizing
transition.
part.
Yeah, let's awkwardly transition to the subject proper. I don't even want to talk about what we're supposed to talk about no more. I want to go back to your Instagram and talk about that shit. But I'm resisting the urge right now, bro, because that's a whole new side of you. That's a
Oh,
whole
man.
side of you I didn't even know about, bro. But yeah, so we're here to continue actually a discussion that we had from part one. Is there or is there not systemic racism now in 2023? I believe when we first did it, it was 2022, if I'm not mistaken. Or at least that's what the title was.
Yeah, I think it was last year at some point.
Yeah. So it's been a while. But yeah, is there still systemic racism here in 2023? You were expressing doubt that there is. You wouldn't commit all the way to saying there wasn't, but you was
No.
expressing doubt like there's no evidence or whatever that there's systemic racism. So
Yeah.
let's do a little bit of a recap. Did you ever get a chance to watch that episode, by the way?
No, I never got the link.
You never got the link.
Yeah.
It's been on YouTube forever.
Dude, I tried to check like maybe a week after. I never saw it. So I was like, okay, he'll let me know when he posts it. I
Oh,
forgot
I
about
forgot to do that.
it. Yeah.
Oh, my bad. All
It's
right,
all
well, I'm
good.
gonna hit you up with the link right now. Shit, ain't no thing but a chicken wing. I can hit it up right now. Matter of fact, I kind of part of me wants to play some excerpts
Let's
just
do
to
it.
see what's good. I'll probably do it in post. I just sprinkle in some excerpts, some
That's cool.
highlights for when I bodied your arguments. But yeah, there's a YouTube.
I
There's a
could choose
YouTube
the
link.
best ones for you and put those out there. You know what I'm saying?
All of them are the best ones for me. What you talking about? You didn't have no good ones. You had no highlights. You think this is karaoke? Matter of fact, I'm actually pretty
Oh
good at
man.
karaoke though, low key. I'm actually not that bad.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
actually pretty good. I'm not that bad. I have
That's cool,
some
man.
select songs that I like to sing though. Some very specific songs.
Well, when I come out to SF, we'll have to go out to karaoke sometime.
All right, but be careful because I'm a competitor. I'm
Bring it
I'll
on,
sing
man.
your ass. I'm gonna sing better than you, and you do this professionally. All right, I put it in the chat. I also sent it on Instagram, and I also sent it on WhatsApp.
Cool.
So,
Got it.
systemic racism 2023. So last time we ended up getting into the criminal justice system specifically. So I wanted to make sure we prioritize that. But I do think that it probably might be valuable to do something of a recap of what we talked about.
All right.
So it's been such a long time, and I haven't rewatched it recently. But what was, I guess, your official position if you can restate it? I think that might be a good place to start.
Yeah, I think my position is pretty um, simple, straightforward. I believe in evidence that I see. I try not to make emotional arguments as far as something as charged as racism is concerned. So we're talking about, systemic racism. My whole opinion about it and my whole position on it is unless I have hard evidence to prove that it is actually systemic in a way that it affects most people within the system in a negative way directly because of the color of their skin or because of their race, then you have a case for systemic racism. But what I find is that once we pull back the curtains, once we peel back the onion, and we really look at whatever category we want to look at, whether you want to look at sentencing, whether you want to look at violent crime, whether you want to look at um, test scores, all of these different things. Um, what I always am countering people on is just because you see a disparity between black people and white people and Asians, just because that disparity exists does not mean that that disparity is caused by discrimination of some sort. Disparities will exist regardless of any discrimination in the world. As a matter of fact, if discrimination ceased to exist today, you would still have massive disparities across people because we have differences in interest, we have differences in culture, we have differences in all sorts of things, differences in IQ, we have differences in all types of things between individuals. So you cannot ever have parity across the board on all categories.
Okay, I don't know that people are necessarily desiring parity in every single thing. If by that you mean everybody's all equal in all things, I think that what people are trying to take into account are like historical injustices and the political, legal, social ripple effects of those historic injustices. So if you have, for example, decades or centuries of specific groups of people being enslaved
Right,
and not being compensated justly for their labor, what are the ripple effects that negatively impact subsequent generations?
right,
Uh, so that might be an example. And so, like, righting the wrongs of history involves very detailed and oftentimes extremely complex calculus of that sort. And some people move on to say that because those ripple effects have never been corrected for, that the damages or harms are perpetual and cyclical in particular ways. They give rise to not only economic disparities, uh, uh, which cause people to have to like not be able to have access to living in more affluent areas and reaping all the benefits that come with that, but having to be forced into living in other areas that are less affluent and all of the negative drawbacks that come with that, but also contribute to mentalities and various different behaviors that are the product of trauma that one endures from living under less than ideal conditions. And if those less than ideal conditions were in some sense created by systemic factors, then there is something substantive to talk about the causal mechanisms, let's say, of that kind of thing.
right.
To act as if my position, counter to yours, is to act as if none of the injustices of history that we know for a fact happened for extended periods of time, and that it's very reasonable to conclude have a lot of ripple effects that still negatively impact people to this day because they were so monumental and because they were so prolonged for an extended period of time. To act as if none of that negatively impacts people today is, in some sense, naive, and I think harmful because being naive in that way actually could cause us to turn a blind eye to the injustices that are perpetuating now or that are being
Yeah,
perpetuated now. What do you say to
yeah.
that?
So I think that the difference is pretty. It's like a really thin line. So I'm not saying that past things cannot influence, future things. Obviously, that's true. The difference, though, is at what level of influence does it have? So when you look at slavery, for how does slavery impact Jason Mewes? Okay. How does slavery impact me? How does slavery impact any black person in America today? Right now, like how is their life being impacted right now that they can draw a straight line to slavery or to Jim Crow? Now, are there some people who are still alive who were impacted and you can see the effects of Jim Crow today? Absolutely. Okay. But the issue that I face is that a lot of people, you have an option. You can either live in the past and allow those things to cripple you moving forward, or you can look at the situation that we're in right now and see it as an opportunity to put yourself at a much better position for the future. So it's not to say that Jim Crow didn't happen, slavery didn't happen. That stuff did happen. But I think a
Right.
part of like your position where that has a blind spot is that regardless of whatever country you come from, there's a group of people that were more advanced than another group of people. And by advanced, I mean they're either better organized, they had better education, they had better technology, whatever have you. So it only makes sense in the United States if you have a group of people who happen to be black, some of them were Asian, some of them were white as well. If you have a group of people who start off way behind the line, it only makes logical sense to deduce that in the future, it's not reasonable to expect them to be so far ahead or even at parity with the people who started off way in front of the line. But what's interesting and unique about the United States is you do have a class of people who did start from way behind the line from slavery and they can trace their ancestors to it, who are doing far better than some people who can trace their history back to slave owners. So the fact that you have white people who can trace their family back to people who owned slaves, and you have black people can trace their um, family back to to slaves, and the black people are doing better than the white people, or the black people are doing just as good as the white people, that makes us, at least at the very least, think that, hey, the situations that this country has created, specifically abolishing slavery, with the Civil War, and fighting the bloodiest war since, to today, we have made great strides to eradicate most visceral things. And like I said, what are the things that are stopping black people today from achieving any level of success? So you want to talk about sentencing? It's like, okay, well, like, what is it that a black person, what is it about being black that makes you be sentenced more? Is that really why you're getting sentenced more? Is because you're black? Or are there any other external factors that we're failing to account for? Is it because you have priors? Is it because of your behavior in court? Is it because of the level of crime that you did? Like, have we accounted for these things?
Well, I mean, I think it's reasonable to ask those questions and to account for those things, but I don't know that you have, because like I think the calculus that's involved in terms of like what actually are the causal mechanisms are actually extremely complex and actually not that simple. And the way that you describe it or talk about it sometimes leads me to feel like, or leads me to believe that you're oversimplifying things. So when you talk about drawing a straight line from racism to the conditions that people, let me say, the conditions of poverty that black people are statistically more likely to live under today, like what do you mean by that? Like,
Okay, so let me ask just a simple question. So, how are you impacted by racism today?
I think in a lot of ways, like that's part of what I'm trying to point out is like there is no one thing. There's like a bunch of complex ways that
Well,
people
there
in
could be
general,
a
like,
bunch of ways, but I'm just asking of one. Like, how are you impacted by racism in 2023 as Jason Mewes, failing
so
to
for
achieve
example, if
great things?
so yeah, so for example, like
Yeah.
there are pervasive negative racial stereotypes of black men that are out there. Different people are liable to hold them unconsciously and uncritically. And if one of those people happens to be a police officer, and based on those prejudices, say the idea that I as a black man am more likely to be violent or have a disposition towards criminality, such that it makes sense to stop and frisk me, or that it gives them a reasonable suspicion or probable cause to pull me over when I didn't do anything wrong. Like that might be an example in which racism or unconscious bias of a racial nature negatively impacts me, because now I'm being negatively implicated into the suspicion, reasonable or otherwise, of a police officer who has a bunch of unconscious biases.
Yeah.
That's that's one that's one illustrative example.
So when you say reasonable or otherwise, I think that's really eye opening, because it has to be reasonable. If it's reasonable, then it makes
It
sense.
doesn't have to
Not,
be.
yeah,
You said it have to,
absolutely. If it's unreasonable, then you have a point, right?
but
But
that's
if
what I
it's
mean.
unreasonable, if it is reasonable to stop you, then, like, if you are speeding, if you fit the description of someone, if you
Okay,
whatever,
okay,
that's
but so okay,
reasonable.
the first one I'm willing to go with you on. The second one, not so much. So fitting the description, you got to break down
Yeah,
what that means, right? That
yeah.
means that I
So
resemble. Hold on. That means that there is a
yeah,
description of somebody. Usually, it's
absolutely.
pretty broad, but there's some specificity to it, and that means that I match the details of that description, and that description can be consistent with several different people. And
Yeah,
a lot of the facets of those descriptions are phenotypical features that implicate race.
sure. And
So just
that's the
because I
thing. It's
happen
like,
to resemble a quasi vague description of another black dude, I don't know that that's a justification for stopping me.
no,
I
so
didn't do
it's
anything.
it's not it's not a quasi, just random profile. It is detailed as they can get, because they
Right,
also
but
don't
what I'm
want to
saying is
stop you
it's
for no
it's
reason.
but it's not detailed enough to specify one particular person. It's
Okay,
consistent with a
sure.
bunch of people.
Sure, they make mistakes. Just like if you were in an agency and you were given a profile to identify someone, it would probably not take you your first try to identify them. Okay, like, at the end of the day, even in the military, like, you do have a profile of a target that you have. Now you do have to do a lot of checks, if it's going to be like a lethal type situation, obviously you have to get the right person and double, triple, quadruple check. But if you're talking about like, you know, trying to stop someone to make sure that they're the right person, okay, that is not like, if you have a description, and a description can be varied. It could be the type of car that they're driving. It could be the weight of the person. Obviously, race is pretty simple. They're black. Okay, the height. All of these things, like I could say, he's 6'3", he's black, weighs about 200 pounds, and drives a Toyota. Okay, if that's the description you're having, guess what's going to happen? A bunch of guys that are black are probably going to get stopped who drive Toyotas and look kind of tall. Okay,
Right.
so it's
That's simple.
not that the cops are trying to stop black people who are tall. It's because the description that they have is matching that specific group of black people who happen to be driving Toyotas who are tall. And so
I understand how
the
it works.
negative
I'm trying to
ramifications.
get at the problematic nature of it. So I'm not saying that individual police officers who put these descriptions together are doing it just to fuck with black people or they have malevolent intentions. That's not
Well,
what
I'm
I'm
glad
saying.
you think that. Yeah, because I don't think they do.
I'm not impugning the motives of police officers necessarily, but what I'm saying is they are engaging in practices that negatively impact innocent black people insofar as they happen to fit these descriptions. And by the way,
Absolutely, I agree with
the
that.
specificity of these descriptions vary. So sometimes it's as broad as it's a black male suspect, approximately
Mhm.
this weight to this weight, approximately this age.
Yeah,
That's it. It's not because the police are bad at their jobs, it's because that's all they have.
yeah, and
And
they
so
got to
that's
go
gonna
off that.
implicate a lot of niggas. And that's
Yeah.
what I'm saying. Like, that's a problematic practice precisely for that reason. And also,
How is it
all of
problem?
those
Okay, so
because
it's
all of those,
problematic. Like I get it,
yeah,
but
but
how
because
is it?
all of
Go
those
ahead.
dudes who are innocent, who are not who you're looking for, who are implicated
Mhm.
in that description, are liable to have an interaction with the police officers that they otherwise would not have had. And those that's an opportunity for something to go awry, right?
Yeah,
And
so
if
I
you want to
agree with
blame them,
you.
go ahead.
I agree with you that there are going to be a lot of, oh, I should say a lot. There are going to be some innocent black people, or black men in this particular instance, who are negatively impacted by feeling as though they're randomly being checked by cops and they know that they're totally innocent, and they are totally innocent. Now, the question you have to ask yourself is, well, why would they be getting stopped? Okay? Why would innocent people be getting stopped? If you happen to live in a community that is riddled with violent crime, for example, okay? There's murders popping off every weekend, okay? And the murder suspects every single time are black males, 6'2", 5'9", whatever, in there between 18 and 35. Okay? If that's the typical profile on a weekly basis that cops are getting, because murder calls are being called out, investigations are being done, and we find out who the murder suspects and the murder uh, victims are, then it only makes sense that the innocent people who live in that community are going to have to bear the consequences of what happens in a violent, crime ridden community. So even though you're totally an innocent person just trying to live your day-to-day life, if you're living in a violent crime area, you're going to get stopped. You're going to get policed more. That's one. Okay. But you're also going to get stopped more. The same thing applies to, like, if you live in a place where people constantly speeding, okay, or constantly using illegal drugs or whatever. If people are committing violent crime in a given area, which forces the police to police that area heavily, you could have another group of people who use drugs at the same rate or maybe even more, who speed at a greater rate than these guys over here. But because the priority in policing is on violent versus nonviolent, okay, the priority goes first to violent crime versus nonviolent crime. Someone's getting killed, cops are going to go there versus somebody's getting robbed over here. Okay, that's priority. So even though even in a place where you have more violent crime, because there's more policing, you're going to get stopped more by virtue of math. Okay, there's more resources devoted to an area that is riddled with violent crime, which means the regular civilians who are just trying to live their life are going to get negatively impacted, not because the system is racist, but because the system has to respond to the level of crime that is happening in that area, contrary to the other place that is also committing the same or even more of nonviolent stuff, but they don't have as much response to that as violent because violent takes precedence. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're trying to say, but I mean, you're just you're detailing and describing all of the facets of the system that are problematic and that make it systemically racist. And by that, I mean it gives
No, that's not
rise to
racist.
racial disparity. It gives rise to disproportionate impacts by race
But that doesn't make
because
it racist. A
that's but
disproportionate impact by race doesn't
that's
mean racist.
that means it makes it systemically racist.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does because
No,
it's
by definition, it
systematically
doesn't.
producing. Actually, by definition, it does because it's systematically producing disproportionate negative impacts by race. That's
No,
what makes
you
it
okay, so
systemically
an
racist.
education system can produce negative impacts or big disparities by race. A
Yeah.
test can be done, okay, between
Mhm.
black people and white people and Asian people or whatever, and we'll
Yeah.
find out that Asians extremely perform well on
Uh-huh.
test scores versus every other demographic, okay?
Uh-huh.
But we're not going to deduce that the system is systemically racist against white people and black people because Asians perform at the top and everybody else is at the bottom. Okay, we have disparities that are going to happen regardless of whether the system has any level of discrimination or not, because Jason and I are different. Number one, so me and you, we're black, but guess what? We have different IQs, we have different skills, we have different interests, and we have different work ethics. I cannot reasonably expect you to perform at the same level as me if I'm using majority of my time or spending an extraordinary amount of time perfecting something over here that you're not. Same goes for me. You can't reasonably expect
If
me to
if but
perform at the same.
if the variants were 100% accounted by differences in work ethic, I think you'd have a point. I don't think that's the case though when it comes to education gaps by race, wealth
Oh, I
gaps by
think it
race.
absolutely does.
I don't think it does at all. I don't think it
Show
does at
me.
all. I don't even think it explains. I don't even think it explains most of the variance. I think a
I
lot of the
think
variance is
it
actually
does.
explained by systemic factors, particularly differences when it comes to certain groups of people statistically being more likely to live under conditions of poverty, which negatively impact test scores. To use
Yeah.
the example
So
that you gave earlier,
explain that
that's
to Asians who live majority in poverty.
the
Okay.
the
Who's
okay. So I don't know what percentage of Asians live in poverty that also excel on those tests. Clearly,
mhm,
all of them don't. So you'd have to be able to say something substantive about what the numbers were.
right. So I'm
But
talking about like
in general, and this applies to Asians too, if you're not dealing with conditions of poverty, right? Then you're actually that actually, and also you're living. So there's certain things that statistically correlate with doing well on a lot of these standardized tests. Living in a two-parent household is one. Not living under conditions of poverty, which usually correlates positively with living with a single parent, etc. Like those are two examples of things that correlate well with doing either. So the more ideal situations correlate with doing well on the test, and the less ideal situations correlate with not doing so well on those tests, right? Like if that's true, then the fact that black people are statistically less likely to have two parent households and statistically more likely to live under conditions of poverty, right, through no fault of the individual black person who's going to be taking these tests, right? That's a systemic issue. That's not
that
the
is
fault
that
of
no,
lack of work ethic or anything like that.
no, that's not a fault of the system. Okay. If
It's
like I said
I didn't
again,
say it was a fault of the system. I said that that's a systemic issue.
okay,
Right?
so if it's a
I didn't
systemic
even
issue, how is
I
not
didn't
fault?
invoke the language of culpability yet because I don't think we're there yet. I will eventually, but like what I'm trying to get you to say is it's just in terms of causal factors, right? Like it doesn't make
So in
sense to
terms of
argue that
causal factors,
the reason why certain people do better on tests or the sole reason why is because they work harder at it, right? Like
yeah.
if you have every bit as much of a work ethic as your white or Asian counterpart, but you have less time to study because you have to commute way further
So
to
if
and
you
from school through no fault of your own. That's not a
well,
that
that's
work
a
ethic
whole
doesn't explain
that's a
why
whole
you're not
different type of
studying
thing.
as much.
So you're
No, no, no,
being
no, no, no. Wait, it's an example. It's a counter example to the kind of explanation you said generally applies. It doesn't generally apply as much as you think it does.
okay. So now you're pointing to two different arguments. My original argument, which is very basic, is that look, point me to a group of people, okay, that spends a considerable amount of time doing one thing versus another group of people, yet they fail to perform better than the other group of people who spends way less time doing it.
No,
Okay.
okay, but
So
that's
for
odd.
example,
Given
right?
the exact wait,
You
that's
pointed
odd.
at
Given the
education.
example I just gave you. If the
Yeah.
reason why one group is not spending as much time, say, studying for some standardized test,
Uh-huh.
is because they're trying to mitigate the conditions of poverty under which they live.
No, they're not. No, it's not.
Say
Uh-huh.
for example, their time to commute to and from school is way longer on average than their white or Asian counterparts
How much longer?
because of systemic. I don't. It doesn't matter. The point is,
Yeah, it does.
if the reason
If your commute is 20 or
no,
30 minutes longer than
you're
the average
missing
other
my
person,
point. Okay,
that's
but
not
you're missing my point.
go ahead.
If it's 20 to 30 minutes longer one way, right? Then that's going to be 40 to an hour of time that you don't necessarily have to study unless you find creative ways to compensate for that. Let's say you're able to study on the train or study on the bus or something like that.
Yeah,
Fair enough. But like
yeah.
if for whatever reason you can't do that because let's say you have to exchange a lot of buses and stuff like that, or you have to wait for your buses or whatever, you're traveling in a situation where it doesn't make sense to get out all your books because the bus is going to come and you're going to have to put it back in there, etc. Right? There might be all kind of practical limitations to your ability to do that. The point is, if that is the reason why you're not studying on average as much as your white and Asian counterparts,
That's a
then
poor excuse.
that is not explained by lack of work ethic.
Yeah,
So that would not that explanation would not apply to anybody like that. And that's just one example. I give you a
yeah,
dozen other
that's
examples
a
of
really
situations
poor
like that.
commute time to school for the average kid is a really poor example as to why kids are not underperforming. Okay? Because
Dude,
I,
no,
I
no,
I
you're
dare
missing my
you.
point. You're missing
My
my point. You're missing my
no, no, no.
point.
But your
I
argument is
extracted
that
that. No, you're missing my argument entirely. I extracted that to give one example of how your explanation doesn't fit. That's one though. I could give
no.
you dozens more.
Wait, hold on, hold on, hold on.
It would be the combination of things like that are counter examples to your explanation.
Oh,
It's
and
not just
I'm
one thing.
countering every example that you're giving because even with
I've
that
only given
example,
one
I mean,
example,
'cause
and
check it
you're
out,
making
right?
it seem like
Check it out.
it's the only thing that I could say.
Okay, so back to education, right?
Yeah.
The same black kids who are not performing well in school are performing extraordinarily well in sports. Okay.
What? Okay.
So
What is it?
the
What does
reason
that
why I'm
compare to?
bringing this up is get to my thesis. My thesis is find me a group of people that spends a considerable amount of time and effort in one area that performs at a lesser level than another group that spends less time in that thing. In other words, I struggle or fail to find a group of people that spend a considerable amount of time doing one thing, okay? Spending all their effort, their resource, their interest in one thing, and then they fail more than another group that's spending way less time doing it. The reason I'm drawing that example is because the same black kids who supposedly are losing time in commute obviously have enough time to get really good at basketball or really good at football. Okay, because they're leading. Black kids in in the United States, we're leading in sports. So the question becomes, well, why are we leading in sports? Is it systemically racist against Asians? No, because Asian kids spend considerably less time playing sports. Okay, they spend considerably more time doing homework, studying, and it's part of their culture in Asia. So it translates to the United States. If you ever talk to any Asian family that has any level of success, you'll quickly realize how structured their whole system is as far as performance. It's an honor shame culture. Everything that you do either brings honor to your family or shame to your family. So that goes to your grades, that goes to who you marry, that goes to everything. And so, in an American culture where it's very individualistic, people are like, "What? YOLO life. I'll do whatever I want. I'm just going to focus on me." In other cultures, even African cultures, it's more about the family unit. It's more about the collective unit and figuring out, okay, what can bring the most amount of honor to my family or to my city or to my town or to my extended family or to our name. Okay. And that's the thing. It's like you have a bunch of black people who do not focus as much time as they do studying as they do in sports. And so their results show up in sports because other groups of people don't spend as much time perfecting that art as much as they do in other things. That's just what it is.
But now your explanation seems to have changed. So you went from, I guess you went from they don't spend enough time to now there's cultural differences. Are
Well,
you
yeah,
saying that
part of
these
culture.
go together in some way?
Sometimes they do. Yeah, absolutely. So like if you look at the average Chinese household, okay, the average Chinese household, a Chinese immigrant household in the United States, okay, it's not just a household where kids are allowed to just do whatever. Okay, they're usually guided into specific fields that are
I
high yielding.
I
Okay,
I,
if
I
you
get it. I
talk to
get
the
it.
average Nigerian family or the average Kenyan, well, I shouldn't say the average Kenyan family, but
I get I get the cultural differences in
yeah.
family dynamics broadly, and I do think that they have an impact on outcomes in education for sure. Um, but what I'm trying to get you to see is that the picture is way more complicated than that, because I don't think that every instance of a black child that doesn't perform as well as their white counterparts on a test is a function of they didn't spend the requisite amount of time or as much time studying, because there are a lot of black parents, not just Nigerian ones, who study with their kids too, and who make sure that their kids dedicate an ample amount of time, despite the fact that they're participating in extracurricular activities on their studies, right? So, like, if your argument is that there's cultural differences and those cultural differences account for some of the variance, I don't have a problem with that. I don't know that the cultural differences account for all or most of the variance, though. And that's what I'm pushing back on. And I'm
I
trying to get
think
you to
that's the
acknowledge the
yeah.
systemic barriers or the systemic factors that account for at least some of the variance, if not a big portion of the variance. I mean, there's even an interplay between the systemic factors and the cultural dynamics that you're talking about. Because a lot of times the cultural norms of certain ethnic groups
Mhm.
are framed under the conditions under which they live. So like if you don't if you have a segment of the population that is statistically way more likely to live in single parent, less than ideal family households, then you can generate cultural norms whereby the discipline's not really there, or the structures that are necessary to facilitate at an early age really good habits that are going to serve them well in terms of having the discipline to sit down and study when you know you're supposed to, taking that responsibility, not being as impulsive, etc. Like those things actually interplay, and so like there's still going to be a part of a causal explanation that is tied to the systemic factors,
Well,
not
yeah,
just the culture stuff. Like the
so
cultures are created under those conditions is another way to put it.
sure. Yeah, there's all sorts of I don't even want to say like being like single mother or single parents is a culture, designated to a certain group of people. I don't think that's a thing. I think that um
Well, no, wait, no.
it-
There are statistics by demographics that are
okay,
well
so there
documented.
are
The single
statistics.
motherhood rate for Black women is pronounced. It's high.
No, I get that, and I know that, right? I know the numbers. I know it's over 75 or 70 to 75%. Okay, single motherhood rate in the United States right now for Black women. Okay,
Uh,
or for Black community. I understand that, but the thing is like just because the number is greater than other groups of women or other ethnic groups of women does not mean that being a single mother is a result of racism or systemic racism. Okay, so when you look at the
I didn't say that. I'm saying that
right,
that's a contributing factor to the less
no,
than ideal
of course,
circumstances
I agree
under
with
which
you. We
school
agree.
age children hold on under which school age children attend the school, and so
We
like
agree on the fact that it does play a role in the outcomes of the kids. Obviously, like you mentioned earlier, two-parent household is a big critical factor in the performance of a child on an average, right?
right, right.
So if you're gonna dial it back to like, okay, single parent households, and we know Black families are statistically more likely to be single parent versus dual parent households, well then
Mhm.
the question isn't whether that's systemic racism or not, because clearly being a single parent has nothing to do with racism. Okay,
No,
like
no, but
you,
wait,
like
wait, wait,
two
wait,
people.
wait, wait,
Hold on,
wait, wait, wait,
one
wait,
one
dude,
second.
wait.
Let me just finish this point real quick. Two people, two people deciding to either not get married or have children out of wedlock. Okay, that is not the invisible hand of white supremacy forcing those people to do that. Okay, now if you look at the
Wait,
60s,
wait, wait. There are wait, dude. Okay, so there are all kinds of systemic barriers to people getting married. Okay, there's also all kinds of systemic barriers for two people who have a child together to even live in the same household, right?
so
And
what
this is
systemic
especially
barriers exist?
pronounced under cycles of poverty. Do you know how much it costs to get married?
How much it
Do you know
costs
how
to get
much?
married?
Yes. Do you know how much it costs to get married or own a
No,
home
please,
that your family can live in or be able
please
to
tell me how
afford
much it
rent?
costs to get married.
Oh my god, dude.
It
So
can cost as
it
much
can
as you want or as less as
it
you want.
okay,
Please tell me.
but dude, okay, first of all, I'm not just talking about the fees for getting a marriage license and stuff like that. I'm talking about the weddings and all of that stuff too.
But
Like,
those are
do you know how
choices.
much it costs? I
Those are
understand that they're
choices.
choices, but like they still are relevant to whether or not
No,
people
no, 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 no,
decide to
no,
get
no, no.
married.
Those are choices. Okay?
I understand that they're
If you really
choices.
want if you really
I
wanna
wait,
marry the
wait, I'm
woman
not
that you
wait, we're
want
not even
forever.
denying I'm not denying that those are choices.
Right, so
Clearly,
why
they're
are we bringing it
choices
as like a inhibiting
because
factor of
because
success?
because okay, because if you want to decide to do something that's cost prohibitive
Wait, wait, wait.
and
So
you don't and you hold on and you live under conditions that are not conducive for you and being able to earn enough money to be able to do those cost prohibitive things, that's going to involve the systemic factors I'm talking about. That's why I keep evoking this language of living under conditions of poverty. That's number
yeah,
one. That's not even
yes.
the only thing. I'm talking
So
like, do you know how much it costs to actually like raise a child in one household?
yeah, it costs a
Like you
lot
got
of
to be
money.
able to. Okay, yeah, it's fucking
Yeah.
expensive, and a lot of and in a
So
lot of cases, if you come from poverty, like these are cost prohibitive things. A lot. One of the biggest reasons why
then
a lot of
maybe
people
they shouldn't
don't
be
settle
having
down and get
kids,
married in the way that they. Okay,
right?
so like, let me get this straight. Your solution to the fact that people are too poor to buy a home and get married and do it the way that they would want to do in the ideal sense is they just shouldn't have kids.
My solution is if you are in a position and you've thought about it, that you are not in the position to raise a family or to provide for a family, then maybe
Uh-huh.
you should triple think your decision to have kids. Maybe you should triple think your decision to get married to somebody if you're not ready to take care of somebody else. Okay? I think a lot of people are making premature decisions all the time, whether it's sleeping around, whether it's having unprotected sex, whether it's having kids out of wedlock, whether it's
Uh-huh.
whatever it is. People
Uh-huh.
are constantly making uncalculated decisions, and then they have these negative ramifications as consequences that they don't want to account for, and they want to blame poverty or their current circumstance as the reason why they can't perform. So, okay,
But I'm
you're
not even
poor.
arguing
If
against.
you're
Hold on,
poor,
I'm not arguing against the ill-advised decisions that people make.
okay,
Under
so
living under conditions of
if you're a
poverty
poor person,
and how that exacerbates their poverty. That's not the debate. I'm not denying any of that. What I'm saying is once the kids are here already though, you got to do something. And a lot of times
well,
under those
you're trying to
non-ideal
put band-aids on a
circumstances,
problem. I'm trying to figure out why
no,
you
I'm
got
trying to
the
help. I'm
wound in the
trying to be
first place.
realistic about what happens in the world. You can judge these people all you want to about their
And we
ill-advised
should.
decisions. Okay, fine. But
Yeah.
setting that aside for a second, you can do that all
Okay.
day long. I'm not even really debating that. Setting that aside for a second, once you're already pregnant and once you've already made the decision that you're going to have your child or bring your child to term, then you got to do something when they're here. And a lot of people do not have the ability to do it the ideal way, right? You
Actually,
can blame
they
them
do.
all you want for their bad decisions.
No.
No, they don't.
I'm not gonna give no.
You can't just will
No.
yourself into having enough money to buy a house, bro. What?
No, you can will yourself to set yourself in position to do it though.
No, but
Okay?
I'm saying
If you're
when you're already in the fucking not
okay,
ideal
so okay,
circumstance.
so let's take it to the extremes then. Okay? People in the worst situations possible. Okay? Now they're there. Now what? At some point you have to dial it back and figure out what's causing it. What you're trying to do is like you got these people walking into a hospital and they're bleeding out and you're trying to mop the floor instead of take care of the bleeding. Like, dude, you got to go to the cause of it.
I'm not even proposing solutions. I'm simply describing the reality. I'm simply saying there's people in the lobby bleeding.
Yeah.
That's all I'm trying to do.
Okay,
right?
I agree.
And
There are
then I'm
people
also
bleeding.
trying to describe the systemic forces that actually contribute to the situation. I'm
So
not
the
trying to
people
lay blame on anybody. I'm not trying to morally evaluate people. I'm simply trying to describe the reality.
But Jason, the unfortunate part about all of this is that at some point you do have to morally blame people. Okay?
Okay, that's
Because
fine, but we're not there yet because all I'm
because
trying to do is describe the relationship between the systemic factors and these non-ideal situations that people are trying to manage.
okay, so do you think that everyone knows there are unideal factors? Of course, right? Like we all know that
Okay,
these things
but
exist.
okay,
So
fair enough.
so
Part of
if
what
we know,
contributes to that, to your point, are bad choices, but also
yes,
part of what contributes to that are systemic factors that are completely out of the locus of control and
yeah,
therefore
I don't think
have
you
nothing to do with
pointed
the
to a
choices of
systemic
people.
factor. I don't think any of those were systemic.
So if my parents brought me into the world out of wedlock and I grow up in a single parent household, is that a result of my choices?
No, that's the result of your parents'
Exactly.
choices. Yeah, that's
Exactly.
not
So I've
systemic.
negatively
That's not
how,
systemic.
how can that not be systemic if
Okay,
that is if
that
these
is a that
circumstances
is
are
a
hold on
choice
if
by your
these
parents.
circumstances wait stop if these circumstances are being produced at a systemic level and at a cyclical level, right, for particular communities, how is that not systemic?
It's not systemic because we're dealing with systemic racism, right?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yes.
it's not systemically racist for you to end up in a negative situation as a black child in a community of people who are with the same situations as you. Okay, because we could do the same
Why
thing.
wait why not why
Why
not?
not? Because it's easy to point to other communities of white people, of Asians, who also come up in negative situations where their parents also made poor
But not at the
decisions.
same rates.
It
Not
doesn't
at the
have to be
same
the same
rates.
rates. That's the thing.
No, but no,
You
no, but
keep
that's a but
going.
no, wait, that's a wait, no, but that's a qualitative difference in the systemic
No, it's not.
outcomes. Yes, it is.
Because
Yes, it is. It's the
that
reason
was
why
part.
black people are more likely to be in these situations in the first place.
No, the
Yes, it
reason why
is.
black no, no, it's not, Jason. The
Okay, so
reason
then
why black people the reason why black people tend to find themselves in negative ramifications or negative disparities relative to other races, 90% of it, if not all of it, can be explained away by choices, can be explained away can be
I,
explained away. So
I don't
if
buy
you're
that at
looking
all.
at if
I
you're
don't buy that
I
at
know
all.
you don't buy it, but every single time you've pointed to something, I'm looking at, okay, well, why don't we look at the other thing over here that we were failing to account for? You wanted to start with school and talk about, they don't have time to they have all this time they have to commute, or they have all these other like poverty issues, whatnot. They can't get to school, they can't spend enough time to study as their other counterparts, but they have enough time to play ball and be good at it, than their other counterparts who are spending more time studying than playing ball. The whole thing I'm trying to open our minds to is
You're
that,
talking in generalities. You're implicating a bunch of different people, and then you're talking about the group. You would have to be able to say that about the same exact people. So if the same people don't have time to study because they're commuting, and then those same people also magically have time to play basketball, that would be a contradiction. But you're talking about a group of people, and a subset of them are going to be the people who don't have time because they're commuting, and a subset of them, which may not necessarily be the exact same people, are going to have a whole bunch of time to dedicate to sports, right? So you
okay,
can't
yeah.
that matters. You can't just gloss over that. Like you're talking too broadly.
Okay, so let's be specific. Find me any data you can find that shows that you have these black people who are spending as much effort and time doing anything, okay? But the results don't show for it, as other groups of people who are spending less
I,
time. Now you're trying
I
to
thought
dial it back and
I
say,
thought I
well, we can't blame the time. Forget the time now, because now, or you're saying we do
no.
blame the time, but you're saying we have to look at other factors, right? Their family
Yes,
status. We have
because
to
that's how
look at
because
all
systems are
these things.
complex.
Yeah, okay, I
So
get it.
I'm
Now,
saying
why
that
is it not
your
complex for the
view
other
is
group of
too
people?
no, I'm saying your view is too zoomed in. If you're talking about systemically wide like factors, your view is too zoomed in. If you're saying find me a group of people that specifically meets these specified criteria, I'm saying, dude, there's a whole bunch of different people in a whole bunch of different situations, and they vary to different degrees. And
Hmm.
it would make more sense to talk about. So if we're talking about populations of people, what percentage of the variance between, let's say, population A and population B, white people, black people, whatever you want, is accounted for based solely on the decisions of the people involved, having nothing to do with systemic factors, versus various different systemic factors, of which I've given several examples. Right. And what I'm saying is a lot of the things that you're coming up with are always going to have an interplay or be tied back to systemic factors. So one of the reasons why I brought up the zoomed in example of, if I am brought into a single parent household situation, that is not the result of my choices. That is
Well,
the result of a
obviously.
bunch of choices that other people made outside of me. Now that's the microcosm of one particular family. Now I'm trying to zoom out and say, but you can multiply that kind of situation statistically over a whole bunch of black families, and there's going to be interplay in terms of causal mechanisms that contributed to those situations that tie right back to systemic factors that we've been talking about. So for example, if one of the reasons why I'm raised in a single parent household is because my dad was incarcerated for the vast majority of my life and therefore could not be available to me in the ways that we ideally expect fathers to be available to me, because of all kinds of criminal justice policies which disproportionately negatively impact black men, right? Those are systemic factors that are contributing to a whole bunch of situations in which children are being brought up in single parent households.
Okay. So you tackled on one argument, right? So you have the you have a kid that's brought up in a single parent household. It's not the fault of the kid, just as much as not the fault of a kid that's brought up in a rich household, right? Because
Uh-huh.
they didn't get to choose that either. They
Right.
didn't get to choose the problems that come with being brought up in a rich household.
Yeah.
They don't You don't get to choose where you're born or who your parents are.
Right.
And then you dialed it back and you said, well, there's these other problems too. Like, I can tie in the sentencing disparities on black men that probably impacted my life if my dad was, incarcerated for an extended period of time and led to single parent household, right? Okay.
That's one example of how systemic factors contributed to those situations.
So even when we dial it back, right, to sentencing disparities, um, as it pertains to black men, you still have to ask yourself the question, what really caused the sentencing disparity? Now, in the genesis, were were black people getting locked up for no reason? Absolutely, like without question. Okay, clearly there
For
was a
hundreds of for decades,
there, there
hundreds
was
of years,
there was
they kept.
slavery, and then there was Jim Crow, there's black codes, all kinds of stuff going on in this country, right?
Yeah.
But the question becomes, how much how much can we account for, especially in recent history? Okay, talk about like the 60s moving forward, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, and within living memory, how much can be accounted for in uh, the situation of black families to, um, the criminal justice system being warped for black people? And can you make the argument that the criminal justice system is more warped today against black people than it was during the era of Jim Crow? Right? I don't think
More
you can make that
warped.
argument. Yeah.
I
So,
I don't know what that means.
but
I
okay.
would say that
So,
the criminal justice system has improved in terms of not being explicitly and diabolically against black people now, contemporary times, as it used to be back in during the Jim Crow South in the South, for example. But
mhm.
like that doesn't mean that there still aren't like systemic factors that disproportionately negatively implicate black people now in 2023. I just think that it's been improved.
Yeah, so my argument is, if you look at history, pre 60s, you had a really, really low, single motherhood rate, which we were talking about earlier. Okay.
Uh-huh.
So you had sub 25% of black families were single motherhoods, single mothers.
Right.
And then you have, and by the way, for white families, it was around 5%. So people usually say, like, black families were the only people negatively impacted by welfare system, whatever systems that were implemented after the 60s with the civil rights movement, all that. But what actually took place is whoever was involved, whoever took part in that system was negatively impacted. So white families, if you look at it today, they're around 30%. They're actually at a worse off position than black families were at in the 60s. or pre-60s. And black families are way worse today than there ever was in history at damn near 75%, which is crazy, right?
Yeah,
So the
but
question becomes, how is it that in a time of greater discrimination, greater visceral discrimination, clear, you don't have to guess about it, you don't have to look at nuance, it's right in your face. How is it that at a time of that level of discrimination and racism, that you had more intact families than you do today?
well, one of the contributing factors is that mass incarceration wasn't as pronounced way back then as it is now. Correct?
Well, I don't think mass incarceration is actually a thing. I think we're under incarcerating people.
What was the size of the prison population back during the time that you're talking about versus the size of the prison population now?
What was the size of the population in the country back then versus now?
Take that into account. So
Yeah.
what percentage? Okay, so what percentage of the population was in prison then versus now? I think that
Uh,
if you answer that
less
question, you'll find
less
you'll
less
find
than
very quickly that
1%.
it's a higher percentage now.
Yeah, less than 1%.
Okay,
Okay.
so there's a higher percentage now of the country is incarcerated.
No, I'm
We have we
saying
have we have the
even
highest
today.
incarcerated population in the world now,
Yeah,
actually,
but we also
and that
have
wasn't true
one of
back
the
then.
largest
That wasn't true
populations
back
of
then.
people in the world,
I
and we also
understand that,
have a
but
lot.
but even by comparable countries, we're still way more than
Like
them. And
what?
my only point, what do you mean like what?
Give
Like
me
what
a
other
comparable
country?
country. Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head. Do you want
Okay,
me to
so you
look
can't
up
say
what
that.
Yes, I can because I know the data, but I can
So
just
what is
look
the
it up.
data? If you're gonna say a crazy statement like, even with comparable countries,
How's
we
that
incarcerate
crazy?
more. Like, just because
How is
we
that
lead
how is that
in incarceration does not indict.
we literally have more people incarcerated than, like, the next, like, what, 8 countries combined or some shit? I'll give you the
Okay,
data, bro, like,
that's fine.
I just vaguely remember this.
No,
What?
no, no, that's fine. Jason, we lead the world in several different things. Okay. We lead we lead the world in innovation. We lead the world in economy. We lead the world in military. Like, we lead the world in several things. We lead the world in incarcerating people. But just because we lead the
Understand.
world in the economy doesn't jump to the conclusion that we're just, you know, unfairly playing the game against everybody else. Just because we lead the world as a military doesn't mean that other people don't have the opportunity to create solid militaries for themselves, as they are already. Okay. So even when it comes
What does that have to
to,
do with what I'm trying to say?
I'm trying to say that you're not indicting America in any negative sense by simply making a statement that we incarcerate more people than the next
I
eight
wasn't
countries
trying
put
to
together.
I wasn't
Okay,
trying
cool.
to
So
indict
then it's a
America.
it's a
I
it's
was
a
trying to
non-point.
speak
Like,
to I was trying to speak to one of the contributing factors, um, one of the things that could help explain the
mhm,
question that you asked me was precisely that our prison population has grown ridiculously high because of our mass incarceration since the time period you're talking about. So if
mhm,
you're talking about slavery, you're talking about the 1800s sometime. Jim Crow is right around the 60s, which is going to be right here. But then since then, like 2014 and beyond, like
yeah,
our prison population has dramatically increased, and it's so much so that we now not only are we the leaders in the world, but we're the leaders by a factor so pronounced that we actually are better than the next whatever number of countries combined.
yeah,
So like if and then consistent with that, if it's also true that our prison population is disproportionately black and brown, then that actually could actually partially at least explain why over incarceration that took place in the time period since the time period you're talking about actually contributes systemically to single motherhood. Now, that's not the only factor, because other explanations from the likes of Candace Owens and Larry Elder have to do with implementing systems of entitlements for women that were designed for the best of intentions, but that actually disincentivize them to get married. So that's another contributing factor. But I was just submitting this as like that actually would reasonably explain the thing that you just tried to challenge me on. That's the only reason I invoked this. I wasn't trying to
yeah.
indict
So
America or anything like that.
cool. So I look at a chart like this, and it doesn't really say much. All it shows me is that prison population has gone up over time.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Now, what that also tells me, and what I can infer through other data, If you look at how many people you think are in prison?
Million. We have like 2 million or something like
Yeah,
that.
2 million people, about 2 million people, right? So divide that by 331 million people. Okay. And that'll tell you how many people are what percentage of the population is in prison. Okay. We're not
The
mass
United
incarcerated.
States 2020 population is estimated at 331,002,651 people in mid-year, according to the UN data. The United States population is equivalent to 4.25% of the total world population. Oh,
Mhm.
sorry. I thought this was going to tell me about the prison population relative. I thought, sorry, that was
So I know
look,
that the number is 2 million, right? You can find it if you want, but if
yeah.
it's 2 million, if you do 2 million, I'll do the math here. 2 million divided by 331 million. Okay.
Okay.
Now
Here's
you have 0.0006. Okay, I'm gonna multiply this by 100 to get the actual number. So we actually have 0.6% of the population in prison. Okay, we're not even at 1%. But we're
Okay.
being given this whole narrative that we're mass incarcerated, okay? That people just getting locked up left and right, okay? We are not mass incarcerated. We're actually under incarcerated. We have people, and we know this in California, bunch of people doing a whole bunch of heinous stuff and getting let out immediately. Cops are being disincentivized from doing their jobs because they know if they catch somebody, either they're going to catch a lawsuit or that person's just going to get released anyway. Like it's crazy out here. And so you can't give me the story of just we're just mass incarcerating black people when they're the ones being let out for doing a whole bunch of heinous stuff, as well as white people, whoever else decides to be a violent criminal or commit all these things like robbing stores and stuff, not getting punished for the crimes that they commit. The that's the reason why the DA and SF got kicked out. But
Yeah.
anyway, I think that when you look
All right.
at
I want
the
to let me read this when you're done.
sure.
I mean, you can finish first. I'll read it after.
Yeah, I think that you draw at, and I find this with a lot of people, but I just hope we can get past this whole idea of I see a disparity between groups of people, and I'm going to jump to racism as the causal factor, or I'm automatically going to think that racism has something to do with it, without actually having any solid evidence to prove that racism is the causal factor. Now, I'm not saying racism can't be the causal factor of like disparities between races. Clearly, it can, and clearly it was during Jim Crow, especially. But today, you really have to work hard. You have to do all these like backhanded, like peeling the onion back and trying to really, really find something that can be explained easily with other things. So if I look at sentencing, if I look at disparities in education, disparities in income, disparities in wealth generation, like all of these different things, most of those things can be again explained away by choices. Okay, they can be explained away by choices, and when people choose to do one thing versus the other, it is a trade-off that they're making. Okay, now that doesn't mean that everybody starts off with the same level of choices. Obviously, I agree with that. But even people who have come from less, and a bunch of rags to riches story, a bunch of people who came from nothing, and actually, most people who achieve any level of success usually have a story of where their back was against the wall and they had no other option but to perform. Okay, you probably have that story yourself. I have that story. Like we all are put in positions where we have to perform, and when we just kind of gloss over that and we just think that people's success or people's failure is strictly limited or guided by their history, I just think that's really short-sighted.
Okay, so the claim that I was making about the United States having more people in prison than the next few countries combined, I think it's clearly false by this because I wanted to see if I could find it. So I misremembered that claim, so I rescind that claim. That this claim is clearly false. Uh, I guess I could, if I skip China, I guess I could probably fudge something like that. But I won't even try to do that. So clearly, we are the. I mean, it's actually surprising given how much of a bigger population China has by comparison to us that we still outnumber even China's prisons.
That's funny.
Um, that's actually absurd.
Well, what's
Um,
absurd is that one, you believe China's numbers, What's even more absurd than that is that I don't think you understand what happens to a lot of prisoners in these countries, Russia, China, okay? Places like China, you get
Why would
killed.
China lie about their numbers?
Well, they lie about all sorts of stuff,
But
okay,
why
to
would what would be the point?
make themselves look favorable on the world stage, okay?
Okay. Are we lying
So,
about our numbers for that reason or no?
what was that?
Why aren't we lying about our numbers for the same reason?
Well, we have the question is not whether or not we're lying, it's the likelihood of whether we're lying or not. Okay. So how
Yeah.
what is the likelihood of a democratic country that is controlled by 50 different states with a bunch of different departments reporting individually versus one country that is totally centralized and all data comes from one place goes to one place? Okay. The likelihood of China lying about their numbers is extremely high versus us lying about our numbers. Secondly, when you look at the likelihood of people getting killed by the Chinese government versus people here getting a fair trial and being sent to prison and having, whether you're on death row or life in prison, okay, that plays a major role. So you have to account for these things. Like, simply the fact that we incarcerate more people is not an indictment on negatively on the American justice system. What if you have more people with more freedoms to do a whole bunch of stuff, and part of the freedom that they feel is doing heinous stuff, and then they get caught and they get sent to prison? Well, that's the system acting appropriately. You did something illegal and you got sent to jail. Okay. The fact that you're in jail, you have more people in jail, is not saying that America sucks. It's saying that America is simply responding to the amount of people who are committing crimes. Okay. Are there some people who get locked up for like stupid reasons? Sure, you can find those. But like with anything, there's always going to be a certain element of any organization that is not favorable, that is heinous, that is horrible, bad apple. Okay. So is there bad apples in the justice system? Of course there are. Is there bad apples in your industry? Of course there are. Is it bad apples in the military? Of course there are. Are there bad apples as musicians? Of course. Like, we could do this game. But at the end of the day, the question is, what is the likelihood of any of our industries or any of the things we're talking about? What is the likelihood of there being something heinous, something nefarious going on in the background? And I think that likelihood is extremely low. I think when I drive in the street, the likelihood of me just getting pulled over because I'm black is extremely low. And I live in a predominantly white community. I live in a I live I live in a place where, with the stories you hear on Clubhouse, people talking about like, oh, I got pulled over because the cop said I don't look like I belong here. I'm like, bro, dude, like, probably I don't look like I belong here, but I haven't been pulled over for something I didn't do. If I got pulled over, it's because I was speeding or I didn't use my turn signal. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that there's never been a case, even here, of a black person getting pulled over because the cop was racist or whatever. But I find that likelihood to be extremely, extremely low because, one, on lived experience and also on the data that you can find of people getting pulled over for no reason. That almost doesn't exist. When you really look at the data, you'll find that there's usually a very strong reason as to why people getting pulled over, people getting sent to prison, people getting whatever. There's always a reason, but we always want to gloss
I mean,
over it.
okay, I mean, I don't know how reliable your experience is going to be. To be honest, it doesn't seem to be objective. And when it comes to the data, I don't. I mean, I don't know how reliable that data is going to be if, for example, police officers have all of these incentives to list what are going to be likely perceived as justified reasons, even when they're not really the real reasons why they pull people over. So I don't know if that settles anything.
But
But I
no,
did
it
want
doesn't.
to. I did want to. I said I don't know if that settles anything. But
Yeah,
what I did want to do is read a couple of statistics because I wanted to back up some of the
sure.
stuff I was trying to argue. All right, so this is kind of old because this is like from 2012, but like the thing that I wanted to read out, because I'm pretty sure the trends have stayed the same, that incarceration rates are significantly higher for blacks and Latinos than for whites. So back in 2010, which is over 10 years ago, black men were incarcerated at a rate of 3,074 per 100,000 residents. Latinos were incarcerated at basically 1,200 per 100,000, and white men were incarcerated at 459 per 100,000. So those trends I don't think have actually changed all that much.
Yeah,
And I just wanted to establish that black people and brown people get incarcerated at higher rates. to justify that me offering that as an explanation. And then I just wanted to reiterate that the United States clearly over incarcerates by comparison to other countries of the world. Uh, they're like more than double everybody except China. If you want to say
Yeah,
China's numbers are unbelievable, put an asterisk next to it. But like it's insane.
we're also bigger than most of those countries by a large margin.
Okay, but we're
So,
not bigger than China.
well, that's one. Point to another one.
I don't know what the populations of these
Exactly.
countries are.
So, like, that's the thing. You look at a statistic and you just see a bigger number disparity, and you jump to the idea that there's something nefarious going on.
The, the
Like I
the most
said,
populated country in the world, we still outnumber them by almost 400,000, dude. So I
okay,
don't know what that matters.
for a country like
300,000.
China, first of all, I don't understand how you just buy into their numbers and don't understand that they literally disappear people. Forget a fair trial.
We don't. I remain neutral on the accuracy of the numbers. I'm just using the data I
Okay,
have
how
provided.
many people do you know of in the United States that got disappeared by the government?
I don't know of anybody who got disappeared by the government.
Okay,
That doesn't mean it doesn't
so
happen.
so we clearly know of a bunch of people that gotten disappeared in China. Like
Do we?
the dictatorship in China is so crazy that people are even speculating that the billionaire, uh, what's his name, Ma, something Ma, uh, that he they got to him too,
All right, the 10
because
most countries that are most similar to the US because it's Canada, Australia. I don't know why New Zealand's on there.
yeah, those countries have nowhere close to our population. Like by the closest you'll find is probably like Brazil. That's not even close to our population. Okay. Like like I said earlier, we lead the world in other things as well. Okay. If we lead the world in military innovation and strength and fighting force, is that a
All right,
testament of
China and India are way more populated than us. We're only third.
okay? Yeah, they
We
both
we
have over a
incarcerate
billion
we
people.
incarcerate way more people than both of those. Indonesia is the next one. Pakistan,
Yeah, so
Brazil.
look at India for example.
We
Okay.
incarcerate more people than all of those countries.
Yeah. Look at the social structures in those countries too. Okay, because you're just looking at imprisonment. Would you rather be sent to prison and actually have a decent life in prison? It's not the ideal life, but at least have like human decency, or live in a place like India with the most heavily caste system in the world, where if you are somebody called the Dalit, for example, okay, you can literally be flogged naked in the streets and nobody cares. Okay, if you're that class of people, you are considered non-human. You are They're called the untouchables. This is a whole class of people, human beings. Okay, so we could either send them to all those people to prison and use resources to keep them alive, to lodging, food, security. We could either do that, or we could just make them slaves. Okay, we can make them our inferiors in society. That's what's happening in India. It is not a hidden thing. This is a real thing. You can find out. Go to Google, type in Dalits. Okay, in India, it's a crazy system. It's a very caste system in India, and there's other caste systems in the world. But when you look at nations like that, you have to ask yourself the question: well, okay, cool. America has a greater incarcerated population than India or China, but what are the living conditions of people even in prison in the United States? And what is the trade-off of people who do go to prison versus the alternative in these other places? You either get killed, you either become a slave, or you get disappeared.
I mean, I don't know that that matters all that much to what I was actually trying to say, which is that like you asked me why you basically tried to challenge me to explain why, consistent with the fact that there was like harsher, more explicitly racist treatment of black people way back in the 1800s and I guess the 1960 time period where the Jim Crow was alive and well. versus now. And I said part of the explanation might be the surge of mass incarceration and the disproportionate impact that that's had on Black and brown people. I don't know that you've said anything that refutes that at all, to be honest with you. And like quibbling over population sizes doesn't really address what I was
Well,
talking
that's
about.
because you brought
We don't
up the
need to
whole
make
story of
reference.
America. The only reason I
But we
touched on
don't
it
we
is
don't need to
brought
make
it
we
up.
don't even need to make reference to the population sizes of other countries. We can just keep it here in America. The only point I was making is
Sure, we can do it.
we had a dramatic surge in our prison population, and that's just true. Like you didn't
Okay, we
refute
had a
that,
dramatic surge in prison population, but
right?
percentage-wise, okay? You
As
can't
a as
just
a
look
as
at
as a function of the percentage of the population.
yeah. Well, look, what is okay, back in, what do you think the proportions were as a percentage of population in the beginning of that chart? Was the chart is like 1920? Was that when it started?
Yeah,
I forgot what the number was. It's
yeah,
like
1920.
1920 to like
Yeah,
2014 or whatever?
yeah, 1920.
Okay, so what was the
It
population of
was
the United States in 1920? And what was the population of
it was way less than 500,000. I don't know. I mean, I'd say maybe like 0.2 million,
it
0.1
was
million.
106 million.
It was wait, what?
It was 106 million people in the United States.
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm looking at the prison population. My bad.
Okay, so what was the
So it was like
population?
it was like 200,000, maybe something like that.
So if it was 200,000,
Anywhere from 100 to 200,000.
okay, so let's go with the higher number, 200,000 people, right? Even at that number, we're still at 0.1%.
Okay.
Okay, so we actually we actually have decreased over time from 1920 as
What
a
do you mean
percentage
we
of the
decreased?
population.
Oh, okay.
So
So
so so
our population grew rapidly too.
no, you're right. That's why it's an important thing to account for. That chart, if you just look at it on the surface level, it looks like, we just shot up in incarcerating people, right? Which is true. The
Yeah.
amount of people in raw numbers who are imprisoned in 1920 is
Yeah.
vastly less than the amount of people who are in prison today. That are like 200K to 2 million. Okay, factor of 10, right? But if you account for the population size, you have 0.1% of the population in 1920 being in prison versus 0.6. I think is it 0.6 or 0.06? I forgot what the number was.
Point
It's probably
6.
0.6. But
So that's an increase, not a decrease.
so yeah, you're right. It is an increase of the percentage, but not by a great margin. It was still under 1%,
Okay. But all
right?
I'm saying is okay, fine. But all I'm saying
So we
we
went
had a
from
significant
0.1% of the
surge. We had a
population to
significant
0.6.
surge in our prison population and a disproportionately incarcerated Black and brown men. So that might be part of an explanation for why we had an increase in the single motherhood rate. It's not the only explanation. That was really the like. This is a weird thing to continue to like argue because it was such a small point and a bigger argument about whether or not there's such thing as systemic racism. My only point that I've been trying to illustrate with these kinds of examples is that systemic factors contribute to the kinds of things that you want to offer as explanations, like cultural differences or time spent doing X. Like there are systemic factors that circumscribe the possibilities for certain groups of people. And so like that's the sense in which people like myself affirm the idea that there's such a thing as systemic racism because there are systemic factors that are disproportionately negatively impacting Black and brown people more so than their white counterparts. And these are having material outcomes in our society or they're contributing to it. Among other things, I'm not saying that they contributed to it and choices don't have anything to do with it. Choice definitely plays a factor, but like ironically, systemic factors actually circumscribe the decision making situation for people. So people actually select or make choices under circumstances where they evaluate the realistic possibilities for them. And sometimes not even accurately or not even in their best judgment,
Yeah, that
ideally.
happens for everyone.
Yeah, but all that really means is society gives you the menu of options and then from there you make your decisions. You can say yeah, you chose the thing, but it's like yeah, but I chose based on what was on the menu of options. Like
Yeah,
everybody
but
doesn't have the same menu.
Yeah, but we're that in that respect, we're also kind of glossing over mindset. You know, people.
I think mindsets are actually impacted, and culture, to your point, are impacted by systemic factors too. They're not dictated because there's a human factor of choice, but like they're definitely the limitations within which people choose are definitely contributed heavily by systemic factors that are out of their control.
Except for when you look at history, like I said earlier, if you look at a time in history where Black people were clearly more discriminated against viscerally, there was no argument, there was no back and forth like we're doing right now, trying to find the nuance in discrimination and systemic racism. Back in the day, it was in your face. And when you look at the greatest gains in the Black community, they happened before civil rights movement. They happened, like the poverty rate of Black people went from 87% to 47% in 20 years, from 1940 to 1960. Okay. That span of time was the greatest deceleration of poverty in Black community in history. And it all happened before it happened during Jim Crow. It happened before civil rights movement, before Brown versus Board, before affirmative action, before all of these things. Like those gains all took place before all of these other things that supposedly were remedies for past behavior or past discrimination. So when I speak about mindset,
Wait,
Jason,
I'm confused. Are you saying that black people were more wealthy back then than they are now? Because that doesn't seem to be true at
no,
all.
that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the poverty rate of Black people was 87%. An absolute majority of Black people were poor in 1940. Come 1960, an absolute minority are poor, 47%.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So you go from like, that's some big numbers, 40-point drop in freaking 20 years in one generation. That's a pretty big jump. And it all happens during Jim Crow. It all happens during the greatest discriminationary period. It all happens during like before Civil Rights Act, before voting, before all these things for Black people. It leads me to really ask the question like how much do we actually limit ourselves mentally? Because even when Bob Marley wrote that song, Redemption Song, when he says, emancipate yourselves from mental slavery, none but ourselves can free our minds. When Harriet Tubman said that I freed 1,000 slaves and I could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves, it really leads me to believe that a lot of people are living within the mentality of slavery when they're not, in fact, slaves, or that they are living with the mentality of being shackled. And so they are indeed shackled in their own reality, but in reality, they're really not shackled. They have the opportunity to grow, they have the opportunity to perform. But when society creates a situation in which you're constantly told that you are discriminated, that you are less than, that you are all these things. Well, shoot,
I think
what do you expect? People probably gonna start believing it.
all right, I think I found something that corroborates what you were saying. So I want to make sure I'm understanding it and proceeding with caution and fact patterns. All right, so all right. Delving into the historical census data, states tax records, and multiple waves of the survey, consumer finances, they construct a consistent measure of wealth by race. The ratio of white to black per capita wealth, which was almost 60 in 1860, when 90% of blacks were enslaved, fell rapidly in decades immediately after emancipation. So what I'm understanding that to mean is the wealth gap between blacks and whites got smaller.
Yeah.
By 1870, it was less than 30. So it was halved. Since blacks were starting from virtually nothing, their wealth rose at a much higher rate than that of whites.
That's way before what I'm
Large,
talking about. This is 1800s.
yeah,
But go ahead.
large racial disparities in wealth holding began to decline after slavery ended. The decline slowed in the segregation era, accelerated in the civil rights era, and has reversed since the 1980s. Uh,
Mhm.
so the gap started becoming more pronounced in the 1980s between blacks and whites,
Mhm.
is what I'm understanding.
Well,
Uh,
they really started becoming pronounced in the 60s, but the peaks were in the 1980s. But the gap started to become very pronounced as soon as the 60s came around with the welfare state. Um,
Okay, so this is interesting. So this because this is going to contradict something you've been trying to argue for a while. In
okay.
the last decade of the 19th century, the rate of decline in the white to black wealth ratio slowed. It would take another 50 years for the gap to fall by half again as the emergence of the discriminatory laws and policies curtail black social, political, and economic advancement. With unequal pay and limited access to capital, blacks face challenges that made it difficult to save, invest, and accumulate wealth. The researchers estimate that if whites and blacks had equal opportunities for wealth accumulation for the last century and a half, the wealth gap today would be 3 to 1 rather than twice that. So I guess it's 6 to 1.
Hmm.
With the immigration of blacks to the North, advances in civil rights, and the dismantling of legal segregation of housing and schools, the pace of racial wealth convergence increased between 1960 and 1980, averaging 1.5% per year, 5 times the 0.3% annual average value between 1900 and 1930. The racial wealth gap has widened in the last 4 decades. One contributing factor has been the slowdown in the rate of growth of black wages. In previous decades, black wage growth has was faster than that of whites. That has not been the case in recent decades. Another critical factor has been the higher rate of price appreciation on assets owned by whites relative to blacks over the last 70 years. So between 1950 and 1980, there was no difference between blacks and whites in accruing rate of capital gains. Since 1980, however, whites have accrued 0.65 percentage points more per year in gains. All of
Okay.
these forces, so all of these are systemic forces, by the way. All of these forces affect racial disparities in wealth. Over the 1950 to 2019 period, housing and other non financial assets accounted for 67% of average black portfolio, compared with 41% for whites. Corporate stock held directly or indirectly through mutual funds or retirement accounts accounted for 7% of black portfolios compared to 18% for whites. Since 1950, stock returns have been much greater than the price appreciation of housing. Investments in the stock market have increased in value 5 times as much as investments in housing, much to the advantage of white households. And then during COVID-19 period, wealth concentration in the U.S. reached its highest level since World War II. Top 0.01% of households are estimated to own 36% of private wealth. The research conclude that, quote, given that there are so few black households at the top of the wealth distribution, faster growth in wealth at the top will lead to further increases in racial wealth inequality, end quote. These are all systemic factors that contribute to the wealth gap, which is precisely what I've been trying to demonstrate in this entire argument. Like, it's not just a function of choices people made.
Yeah. So you don't know what I think about the wealth gap?
I mean, I'm sure you're going to try to deny it.
No, I'm not denying it. I think the wealth gap exists and will always exist. Um, but I think it's really meaningless variable.
How
Um,
could how could
eh,
something
eh,
so essential to your life prospects be meaningless?
well, it's meaningless in this respect. So wealth is completely different than income. I think income gap would be more fruitful conversation.
Income is a vehicle to generating wealth.
No, absolutely. Which is why income is more important than wealth because because wealth is a derivative of what you do with your income. It has choices imbued in it. So does just because, like for example, let's say you make $10 million a year and I make $100,000 a year. You make 10 times more than I do, but I can actually create more wealth than you if I'm smarter than you. Okay, because guess what? The simple reality that you make 10 times as much money as I do does not mean that automatically you're going to be able to generate wealth.
Do you think that the wealth gap between blacks and whites is because white people are smarter than black people?
I think no, I don't think that white people as a race are smarter than black people as a race. That's not what I'm going at. What I'm saying is that if you're going to look at generalities and we're going to dial in and figure out, okay, why is black people on an average not creating as much wealth as white people or Asians as an average? It's because of a choice disparity. And when you look at it,
What,
the
what, what,
choice
what,
disparity.
what do you mean?
Oh, no,
What
no,
do you mean by that? No,
a
I just
choice
want you to
disparity.
clarify what
Yeah.
you mean by that term,
So the
choice
choice
disparity.
disparity is goes back to like what we were talking about education. Okay. Look at the fields in which black people, as in general, sure you can find black architects, black software engineers, black uh, black people in highly skilled fields, right? You can find just like you can
Yeah,
find
but they're
black people in very low
statistically
skilled fields.
they're
But
statistically rare.
when you yeah, they're statistically rare. But when you look at other groups of people like Asians, for example, you'll find them overly represented in high income yielding fields. And it just doesn't start in the high income yielding fields, it starts in the high income yielding majors, right? So when they go to school, they're not just like undecided major or liberal arts or underwater basket weaving. They're not going for stuff that's not going to pay off. They're going for stuff that's going to pay off. So the question to you is, what percentage of black kids are going to school for high income yielding majors and
Mhm.
for high income, which yields to high income yielding careers,
And are not dropping out.
and are not dropping out?
You don't think that there are any systemic forces that contributed to their prospects of being successful in those programs?
Of course there are, but that's not the question.
Well, it's germane to the question of systemic racism, though.
Okay. All right. So you have black kids that are find themselves in a school, okay, in a high school. They go to school, they're graduating from school, and they're trying to decide, or even when they are in middle school and going into high school, word is coming up that, hey, you're going to be going to college soon. Okay. You need to figure out what you want to do. Public school is free. Okay. You have this situation in which you can literally sit down. If you have a parent that cares about you, they can sit you down and tell you that for especially a poor family, okay, and this is not to say black families are just poor, because that's not the reality. Most black families aren't poor, but
Do you know the college dropout rate for black people?
I actually don't. What is the college dropout rate?
It's over half.
Over 50%. What's the college dropout rate for white people?
Um, Hold on, I'm trying to show you.
But again, I don't really care about the disparity in number. All I care about is like, why are
No.
they dropping out? That's more important to me.
Okay. College dropout rates for different races. In 2-year colleges, 10% of Asians, 31% of black students, 18% white students, 21% Hispanic students. 4-year colleges, 35% of Asian students drop out for 4-year colleges. That's the lowest dropout rate.
Yeah.
52% of black students, 42% of white students, and 40% of Hispanic students. 53% of Native American students. So over half of black students drop out by comparison to 42 of their white
So over
counterparts.
half of Black and Native Americans drop out, and
Yeah.
closely in second place are white people. Um, so so again, like these numbers don't really say much to me, because it's not an indictment on race. It's just an indictment of performance of different groups of people. Um,
I'm not
and
trying to. Why do you keep saying that? I'm not trying to indict race per se. I'm trying to be. I'm trying to. If I'm doing anything, I'm challenging some of the claims that you're making, because if the idea is that black people, the problem is just that black people aren't going into the right majors. It's like, well, they're also like over half of them are actually not even completing any programs.
yeah, you know why?
There's a lot of systemic reasons why, but what do you think is the reason why?
So I think that a major reason why is affirmative action. And when you
Oh,
look, and all you got to do is look at time period before affirmative action, look at the dropout rates then. When you are unfairly matched, okay, because of some wanted outcome, some mixing and matching to make our colleges and universities look like the general population in the country. Okay, when you do that, and by the way, we never do this in sports because everybody knows it's going to suck to watch it, and so nobody does it. But when we do this in education, where we say, well, we need this many Asians, and we need this many white people, and we definitely need this many black people, so we can make sure that our school looks diverse. If you really care about diversity, send the black kid to a predominantly white school. Get all the diversity he needs there. But if you look at what's happening, is that we're sending black kids who are not qualified at the same rate as their white counterparts. Okay, they say a black kid who's top of the class, but he's in the 75th percentile in mathematics. Okay, yet they get matched to MIT, where the average student there is in the 90th percentile in math. When you put that kid in MIT, you're basically inducing failure. You're taking a student who is at the top of their class, maybe in their region, they're the top of the class. But nationally speaking, they're not at the top of the class. They're dealing with a different stratosphere of mathematicians. And so when you send them to MIT, even the professor who's teaching math in that level, they're not trying to go over certain equations you should have known as a 90th percentile student. And so when you're sitting in a place, and this happens in any field you want to point at, sports, business, anything, if you're unmatched to people and you're forced to perform at the level of people who are on a different stratosphere, you will not only feel like you don't belong, but you will feel like you'll feel like a failure because you're having to perform with people you literally can't perform against. So what are your options? You're either going to drop out or you're going to switch majors. Those are your options because you can't compete with those people. They're in a different stratosphere. So you have a bunch, you have a very significant proportion. I think the last time I checked the numbers on MIT is 40% of the students, of the black students who were put in through affirmative action, dropped out because, strictly because they were mismatched.
Black or
Okay.
African American students in bachelor's programs have a 5-year graduation rate of 40.5%. By comparison, Hispanic or Latino students in bachelor's programs have a 5-year graduation rate of 41.5%. White or Caucasian students in bachelor's programs have a 5-year graduation rate of 62.2%. Damn. 1% of college graduates are black. 1% of college graduates are black.
Where you
3% of
see
black or African Americans. Are you not seeing?
I know I see what you have on there, but where's the 1% thing?
All right, let me blow it up. 1% of college graduates are black.
Oh,
That's
1% of college graduates are black or
I didn't
African
know it was
American.
that low.
Yeah.
3% of black or African American graduates earn 13.3% of associate's degrees. 2% of black or African graduates earn 10.1% of bachelor's degrees. 5% of black or African graduates earn 11.3% of master's degrees. 1% of African American graduates earn 7.5% of doctorate or professional degrees.
The 1% number, like, it makes a lot of sense though, considering the dropout rate. If you account for
Well, I
dropout,
guess what I was trying
out.
to, in a very slow but steady way, try to like signal to you that your explanation for uh, why Black people aren't getting, I guess, good jobs as a result of graduation is going to be more complicated by these statistics. I think there's a
I don't
lot of
think
black.
it's
There's a lot of black people who are they're not only are they not necessarily joining the programs that you're talking about, but even if there were, since the dropout rates are so pronounced, they wouldn't even be able to take advantage of the degrees anyways.
yeah, so the question is as what types of degrees are experiencing the highest level of dropout? Are
I
are
don't.
are, are black people dropping out of and this goes back to my affirmative action, bit. Are black people going into high level fields, high yielding fields and dropping out? Are they going into low yielding fields and dropping out? Are they dropping out of all fields at the same rate? That's a very important question. I think that based on the data, black people are not going into high yielding fields as much as any other group. Okay. I don't think black people are going into high yielding fields as much as Asians, for example. And so you can't reasonably expect black people to outperform Asians. One, because they don't even show up in the numbers as far as how many people are enrolling in those fields. And so the graduation rates, whatever they are not going to be anywhere close to Asians, period. So even if the graduation rate was 50% black people and 40% or 25% Asians, the simple reality that you have more Asians enrolling in these fields, you're going to have a greater outcome for Asians by math.
What would be the fields you're talking about? The sciences or engineering?
Yeah, mostly STEM. So, science, technology, engineering, um, high yielding fields, being a scientist, being a engineer of some sort, whether it's a nuclear engineer or a software engineer or the future fields that are high in demand. So it's like how many
Even
high
as
demand.
colleges pledge to improve share of engineering and math graduates who are black declines. This is April 2021. I just want the data. Black students earned 7% of STEM bachelor's degrees in 2018, down by more than 7%. Black people hold 7% of jobs in these areas requiring bachelor's degrees. That's about half their proportion of the population. So they're underrepresented.
That's not an underrepresentation.
Yes, it is because because the benchmark is 14% of the population, and they're only 7%.
No, that's just representation. That's not underrepresentation.
It's if the benchmark is the percentage of the population, it is under.
Well, what I'm saying is, looking at the benchmark of percentage of the population is meaningless. Like,
It's not
if
meaningless.
if you have half the people showing interest, you can't say that they're underrepresented if half the people showed up. It's just like, no, the right people who decided to show up showed up, and they're
No,
represented.
it's not. It's not. But it's still not meaningless, though. So
Underrepresentation is
that
like,
would be a part of an explanation for the underrepresentation, but that
well,
wouldn't.
underrepresentation implies that there's something nefarious going on, some
Not
discrimination.
necessarily. No, it just all it means. So there is a reading or a connotation of that for sure, because
So, so when you're saying underrepresented,
because
you
a
just
lot of
mean,
people use it like that. But the denotative meaning of it just means that relative to a certain benchmark, and the default benchmark is percentage of the population, they're beneath that. That's all it really means.
okay, I can rock with that as long as we're not trying to tie in discrimination as being the result of that.
Well, I
You're
mean
using it as a definition of just like,
it would depend on what the causal mechanisms were. Like
no.
I'm
I'm
not
saying
ruling it
in
out
this
either. I don't
context,
know if it's discrimination. I'm simply saying just as a like non-evaluative statement, I'm saying just descriptively, it's underrepresented, meaning it's under the benchmark of the percentage of the population that black people have. I think
that's
actually
why you have to
they're more
qualify
like
it.
12 or 13%, not 14.
Yeah, I think it's 13 to 14, but I think you'd have to qualify it by saying they're underrepresented based on the percentage of population.
Well, that's what I'm saying is when people say they're underrepresented, that the default benchmark is the percentage of the population. So it usually doesn't need to be said.
Yeah, which usually implies discrimination. So when I say black people are overrepresented in the NBA, okay, are we just saying that black people make up majority of the NBA, or should we? Why can't we just say black people are 70% of the NBA? Why do we have to say they're overrepresented?
Because relative to their percentage of the population, they're higher than that, way
But
way
what
higher.
difference does it make? Why does it matter that they're overrepresented?
Because if it was going to be a complete random sample, you would expect it to match the percentage of the population.
No, you wouldn't,
Yes,
because
you
you're not
would.
accounting for interest. No,
I know that because you
a
wouldn't
random
account for interest.
sampling means,
Hold on. You wouldn't account for interest if it was a random sample.
no, you absolutely would, because
So you
even in
wouldn't.
random samplings, people have interests.
No, dude. What we're saying is like if it were wow. So if it were going to be a representative sample of the population, and that in that sense it was just random, and you're not accounting for any of the other factors,
Uh-huh.
you might expect it as a default to match the percentage of the population.
But you wouldn't, because you know that in a random sampling of the population, you have majority black people uh, who basically show more of an interest towards sports
But
than
that's
other
not.
groups.
But that is an antithetical to it being random because people are making intentional decisions.
So, well, you said you would expect. So,
Yes.
yeah,
So
so you wouldn't
I'm saying
expect it.
all things aside, including but not limited to people making intentional decisions based on their interests, right? If you just had a random sample, you
Of
might
robots.
expect it,
Yeah.
robots, whatever. You might expect it to match the percentage of the population.
Yeah, I don't buy that one bit.
That's why people use that as a benchmark in the first
I don't
place.
buy that one bit. I don't think that there's any reasonable expectation of people having some sort of parity based on percentage of population. Like, that makes no sense. Like your
because
percentage of
you're already
population,
starting from a point of view of trying to account for things like people's individual preferences.
your percentage of population, your representation of the population bears no like effect on your representation in any field. Black
That's
people
not
are
true.
overrepresented. Yeah, it is.
That's
Black
not
people are
true.
overrepresented in sports and entertainment, right? But they're underrepresented in educational outcomes, okay,
Yeah,
or
but
income
the
generation.
population is going to have a limiting factor on how many people there even are to be available to be in different things, dude.
Yeah.
So
So why
it's
are
going
they
to have some
overrepresented
bearing
in?
on it. It's
Okay,
not completely irrelevant.
no, no, no. It's completely irrelevant because again, black people are clearly underrepresented based on the total population of the country. Okay,
No, their
in any
percentage,
field, they're
their percentage.
underrepresented. But in every single aspect, you will find black people overrepresented in the NBA and sports. They are overrepresented in these sports in which they show most interest. They're underrepresented in golf, underrepresented in hockey, underrepresented in all these other like sports.
That's
But
this
guess
is not
what?
an argument against what it means to be over or underrepresented.
But
This is
that's
an
what it is.
application. This is an application of what it means to be over and
So that's why I
underrepresented.
mean, like your representation in the population as a percentage really means nothing when it comes to being over or underrepresented in any other industry. You
It's
could
not
be
that
overrepresented
it's
in
not
the
that it means
NBA,
nothing. It's just a
but
normative benchmark.
underrepresented in something else.
It's just a normative benchmark against which it makes sense to compare things. That's all. Like I don't know why you're fighting this so hard.
No,
Like no,
I think it's a strong
there's
point
nothing about it
because
being used as a benchmark that says that things like humans making decisions doesn't matter or is not a valid explanatory thing. Like that's not what
no,
that
I know
means.
you're not saying that, but what you are saying is that an underrepresentation that we observe because you keep harping on every little piece of evidence that you've tried to bring up has been underrepresentation or overrepresentation. It's been a disparity of some sort, okay?
Yeah.
And you use that as like a benchmark of trying to prove systemic racism simply because we observe a disparity between groups of people. What I'm trying to tell you is that in the United States or anywhere in the world, when you have free people, you're going to have disparities, even if all 100% of the people had no ability to discriminate. You would still have massive disparities because you have to account for interest. And the interest comes in and shows up in different percentages across the board. So
But not
black
all
people are
disparities.
overrepresented. Hold on one second. Black people are overrepresented in sports and entertainment and nobody cries about it because they're like, well, black people worked hard for that, right? Black people put the sweat equity in there. But when it comes to these other things that black people want to get credit for, they don't, they have everything to say about it, even though they didn't put as much sweat equity into those fields, like education, okay? Like higher income yielding fields. Like if
Did it ever occur to you
you
that
can
one
be
of the reasons why
underrepresented here and overrepresented there, but your percentage of population remains the same.
did it ever occur to you that one of the reasons why nobody quibbles over the very rare instances where black people are overrepresented in domains that like pay as well as like say pro sports is because there's so few examples of domains like that where black people excel in?
No, because
Like wouldn't that make sense
again,
as an explanation of why people
no,
don't quibble over that too much?
no, because the reason why is because even black people know that when black people put in a bunch of sweat equity, a bunch of effort and time and resources and dedication to any field they excel in. Like we know that. Same thing with white people, same thing with Asians. Everybody knows that if you're going to put in 10 times the amount of effort than somebody else in any field over time, your results will yield and show up and manifest than other groups of people who didn't do the same thing as you did. Like that's straight up like basic
Do you,
understanding of how the world works.
but like what's fascinating about what you're saying is I don't know that black people don't know that. Like black people are, I think, are
No, I
well
didn't say
aware
that. I said they black
broadly.
people know that.
Okay, well then we agree that black
Everybody
people
knows
know that.
that.
But like there's a long ass standing history where it's well documented where black people were explicitly prohibited from being able to dedicate themselves to certain domains of society, including but not limited to even attending colleges. Right?
Okay.
Like black people weren't allowed in so many aspects or domains of public life for hundreds of years
Yeah,
in
but we're
many
talking about
cases.
today, right? So
Okay,
like
fair enough. But
I
what I'm
never
saying is
said
that the negative ripple effects, systemic, political, and social ramifications of those centuries-long policies, right, are still rearing their ugly head today. And you're
no, they're
acting
not.
as if, or speaking as if, because slavery ended and Jim Crow ended, that there cannot possibly be any residual negative impacts of those things. And I don't think that that makes sense.
I think the level of residual that still exists is mostly mental, like I said with Bar Marley. Okay, it's mostly mental. It's like almost 100% mental because if any black person I've talked to, like any African American that I've talked to, that can point their lineage back to slavery and Jim Crow, they have parents that lived in Jim Crow.
Uh-huh.
Any people that I've really talked to, and I asked them, okay, today, what is really stopping you from achieve? Like, what are you trying to achieve? What's stopping you?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, now I'm good. I got my house. We're good. I can get a job anywhere. My kids are set. And some people who are not doing so well, they're like, well, I'm trying to pay for my kids' school, and I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to get a better job, and it's like they never point to any systemic thing that's stopping them from achieving what they want. They point to themselves saying, I just need to find a better job, or I just need to go to school and get a better degree so I can make more money when I go to a better job, or I need to move to a better place. So they know they have options. None of them tell me, well, shoot, you already know what time it is. We don't really have any options in this country. You know about Jim Crow and slavery. Clearly, nothing's changed. Clearly, when I go to a job interview, they just look at me and they're like, "Oh, is he black? Oh, yeah, we don't want him." Like nobody ever says that.
Well, out loud.
No, 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 no.
Because
I'm saying the black people that I've talked to, that I've ever confronted about any of this racism stuff, they have never told me that when they went to wherever they're trying to achieve, that it was because of racism that they couldn't do it. Never was the case.
I don't know why you're getting you did this the last time. You get so bogged down by the term racism because you think you think of racism as meaning only one particular thing, and I don't think that it means that when people talk about systemic racism. I think that what they mean are disproportionate negative impacts by race. That's all they mean. They're
Yeah,
not even
yeah.
necessarily uh, saying or implying, trying to imply anything about
So that's not what systemic
like people's
racism is,
intentions.
Jason.
That's what they
Systemic,
mean by it. That is what
yeah,
systemic
but
racism is.
that's not what like you can say that, but systemic racism is not having disparities between race. Okay, like systemic racism is discriminating, like having a system that discriminates against people by race. That is a systemically racist system. Okay, that's what you
No,
call systemic
but it
racism.
doesn't necessarily have to. Well, in some sense, I mean, so what is your obsession with the discrimination piece? Like, do you think that it
Because
means
you
that
don't have
somebody is
racism
making the
unless you're
decision? They'll be
discriminating.
like, I hate.
You don't have
That's
racism unless you have discrimination by race. That's literally what racism is.
okay, but if you systematize it so that no human being is making the choice, but it's basically automated and inculcated in systems,
No,
are you saying
human
that
beings are
it
still
can't
making
count
a
as
choice
discrimination?
no, even in a systemic thing, human beings are still making the decisions. Like you create a
But not
system, guess who's
actively
gonna
though. It's all passive
okay,
usually.
show me an example. Show me an example where humans aren't
So
in play making decisions in a
show
system.
you an example.
Yeah.
So if you implement all kinds of well, I'm not saying that there's no humans making decisions anywhere. I'm saying that the human like oh my
No,
god.
in any part.
I'm saying that when you systematize things, there's an automaticity to it that doesn't necessarily involve
Show me the
any human being
complexity.
saying because you're black, this, therefore this. That's what I'm saying.
Show me how a system is in play where what black or human beings are out of the picture.
I didn't say human beings were out of the
Okay,
picture.
so I'm saying in every bit of it, human beings are in the picture making decisions. There's no automation that's like outside of human beings making the decision.
I don't know what that means. I'm not
You
denying
said
that human beings
automation.
make
You said like
decisions. I'm
it's
saying that when you
automated.
systematize things, there's a certain yes, because there's
So
okay.
okay,
So
so
here's an
where?
example. Here's an example because
Yeah.
I don't this is annoying me now. So like we have all kinds of institutions that are that systematize all kinds of policies, right? And basically, we establish like officially recognized norms for doing things. Those are definitely going to involve human beings making decisions, but a lot of times they make decisions in accordance with established norms or rules or policies or guidelines that are
I'm just giving you
officially
one example.
recognized. Okay. So in education, for example, we have all
Mhm.
kinds of policies around absences. If students are absent too many
Yeah,
times, there's usually a certain set of consequences that are across the board supposed to be done for every student, no matter what color, no matter what
right.
race, ostensibly, right?
Yeah,
That's an example of a policy. There's a certain amount of automaticity to it because once you're absent, however many times, it triggers this process, this
yeah,
protocol, right? Okay.
yeah,
Now that involves human beings making decisions. I'm
absolutely.
not I'm not denying that, but there's
Okay.
a certain amount of automaticity to the way that the system functions
That
because
okay, that
people
has
are
nothing to
acting in
do with
accordance
humans
with.
being absent from it.
I never. Okay, so for the fucking like 50th time, I never said human beings were absent from systems. I never
No, no,
said
no,
that.
you didn't say that, but you said that it's in an automated
It's
level where you can't
automaticity.
just say that
But
human
they
beings
did,
are always part of
but
it.
the human beings are acting in accordance with rules, and that's
Rules that they created. Yeah,
the rule.
absolutely.
No.
Who created the
A
rules?
lot of times, the people who are implementing the policies or the rules or the procedures didn't create them at all.
Oh, no, okay, so they were created by robots
They were
or
no,
created by people?
they were created by people, but they weren't created by
Okay,
the people
cool.
who are
That's all I'm
implementing
saying.
them.
Yeah,
No, but what I'm saying is that distinction is not trivial. So, for example, if the school administrators at a certain school have to follow district policy, and the district policies were put in place by the school board or whatever, right? The
yeah,
school board made that decision, but the
yeah,
administrators at every school have to follow that.
yeah.
So the people who are implementing the policy are not the people who made the policy. They just
No,
have
you're
to follow the
absolutely
policy.
right. But guess who's implementing the policy? Guess what they have? A choice. Okay? If
No,
you if
no,
yeah.
no, 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 no.
Oh,
Because a
so
lot of
so
times
they
they're hold on, stop. Because a lot of times they're duty bound by the official expectations of their jobs to do that thing. And if they
sure.
don't do it, they can lose their jobs. So
No, no, no.
it's not
I
that
get
hold on,
I
wait.
get that,
It's not
Jason.
that they don't have a choice. They could be
They could
derelict in their
quit.
duties, or they could contradict
Yeah.
their jobs, or they could quit. But what I'm
Yeah.
saying is there's a sense of obligation that is created by these systems. And that's one of the
As is
reasons.
in every job, yeah.
Okay, fine, but that's one of the things that maximizes adherence to the rules in the first place.
Okay. Okay, so let's say the absence rule that you're talking about. Even that has nothing to do with systemic racism.
Oh my god!
It
So it
doesn't.
can if it disproportionately negatively impacts black kids,
No, because we already established that
particularly
this
if the reason hold on, particularly in a place like San Francisco, where if the reason why black and brown kids are disproportionately more likely statistically to be late and or absent is because the systemic conditions under which they live in a place like San Francisco make it the case that they have to move and live further and further away and have to commute further to come to school because they can't afford to live in an affluent area in San Francisco, which is
okay.
actually the reality of
So
a lot of the kids I teach.
okay, so why is it that I find this just a weak argument. So if you know that your commute time, and this applies not just to school, but to work or anything else you got to do.
Uh-huh,
If you know that your buddy lives 5 minutes from the school, and
uh-huh,
you live 30 minutes from the school, six times the distance, right?
uh-huh,
Or six times the time.
uh-huh.
What does that tell you? You got to leave earlier,
Okay.
right? So
Yeah.
you can get to school either early or at least at the same time as your buddy who can sleep in a little bit more and get there in 5 minutes.
Right.
So the same black kids that live in San Francisco and have to commute twice as long, for example. I don't even think it's twice as long, but let's say it is, right? Say they have to commute twice as long as their white counterparts or Asian counterparts. Guess
Right.
what the black kids and the white kids have to figure out? How to get there early.
Right.
That's not calculus. Okay, that's simple. Figure out on your Google Maps how much time it takes you with public transit or whatever to get to your location to school and leave in the appropriate time.
But there are practical burdens that you're not
Like
taking into
what?
account. So first of all, if you're going to take public transportation, your commute may actually be tripled or quadrupled relative to the amount of time it would take you to go that extra distance if you had your own car.
Right. So
for
leave
example.
earlier.
Okay, fine. So you'd have to leave even earlier,
Yeah,
which most likely means for your average school day that you're probably going to have to get up way earlier than everybody. And
absolutely.
if
That's the
okay, fair
trade-off
enough.
of living in a that's the trade-off of
Okay,
living
but
in an
I'm
expensive area
okay.
that you can't afford.
Fair enough. But
Like,
I'm trying to get you to account for the burdens that that puts on people. So if that what that effectively means is that I'm going to have to sleep less.
yeah,
Okay.
maybe,
So
maybe, or go to sleep
if I'm
early. Like,
okay, fine. So then but there's only so much time in the day, so I'm gonna have to sacrifice at some level, right? So I'm either
well,
gonna have to get
again,
rid of my
I don't.
leisure time. I'm gonna
Yeah,
have to. I'm gonna right. I'm gonna have to get to bed early so I can wake up
you're gonna
early.
have to do what it takes. Your
Okay.
job is to go to school.
So
You don't have a lot of
I'm
responsibility.
burdened in a
Yeah.
way that my counterparts who live closer to the school are not burdened, right? Because of what it takes for
Yeah,
me to get to
because
school on time.
because you live like 30 minutes away from the school, you have
Yeah.
to take that trade-off.
Right.
Like, you can't sit there and cry about, "Oh, I have 30 minutes to
No,
get
no,
to
no.
school,
It's
and
not
if
about
I
the
don't
crying. It's
that's
not about the
fine."
crying. I'm trying to get you to recognize something very specific. Is that I'm burdened in a way.
You're not burdened.
Systemically,
It's
there
it
is more of
look,
a burden. If I have to make more sacrifices that other people don't have to make, then I'm burdened in a
look,
particular way that other people aren't.
we are that's Americans are so privileged to think that a commute time of an hour or less is somehow a great burden from achieving educational success. It is incredibly
You're
privileged.
not, but you're not recognizing what I have to sacrifice in order to accommodate that lost time, right?
Okay, let's do it. What are you
Okay.
accounting for?
So
You are a
so
student, you don't have
if
bills to
I
pay. Like,
okay, but so it depends on the living situation, right? Because these things are
yeah,
going to start
most
to
kids aren't
become
paying bills.
okay, fair enough. But I'm talking about the in terms of the burdens to me as a student, as a school age child, right?
Uh-huh.
It depends on what my living situation is. So if because these things are going to start to compound on each other and they're going to start to maximize the amount of sacrifice that I have to make to compensate for them, right? So
Okay.
if on top of the fact that I have an extra half hour to drive my counterparts, they have 5-10 minute commutes. I have a 30-minute commute if I'm in a car. That 30 minutes can easily become an hour and a half if I have to take public transportation.
Okay.
If I don't have
So
reliable transportation because I'm living under conditions of poverty, or because the demands of my single mother's job require
mhm,
me to have to take public transportation so that she can get to work on time, then I can't use her car because she needs to use her car. Number one.
okay.
Number two, if she has to take me to school and go to work, that's going to have more burden on her in terms of gas expenses because she's driving longer and farther every day on average relative to her counterparts on average,
Cool.
right? On top, right? Okay. On top of that, if if my mom has to work really long hours in order to make ends meet, and I have siblings, and I'm the oldest, then I have a extra responsibility in the context of my household to take care of my younger siblings, which means that instead of doing my homework or other constructive things that I could be doing while I'm at home or just relaxing, I have to make sure that my younger siblings are getting to bed, that they're fed, that I'm doing chores, etc. These are the actual realities of students that I've been teaching over the last decade. And then you add up all of that time taken out of their day outside of the classroom, right? And then you ask that student why they didn't read something that would have taken them an hour and a half to read. And then they fill up, they give you the details if they're gonna be honest. A lot of students don't even feel like they need to tell you that shit because it's really private. But they tell you, like, I had to do this, I had to do that, I had to do this, I had to do that. And for a lot of these students, they're not even capable of doing extracurricular activities because their schedules don't even permit it. Some of these students, to help their parents make ends meet, actually work starting at age 16 in high school because I taught at that level. So some of the students are actually going to work. But some of these students, because of the burdens such as I just described, they actually have scheduling conflicts with their jobs that they're trying to have. And the whole purpose of their jobs is to either help them have their own money or help them make ends meet with their families. These are the
Okay.
conditions of poverty that people have to compensate for. Now, if on top of all of these responsibilities that are a function of the practicalities of my living or my less than ideal living situation, right? I can't squeeze in extra time to study for the SAT, right? And that's the reason why I'm not studying as much as my Asian or white counterparts who only have to drive 5 minutes to work, who have reliable cars, who have two parents, etc. Right? Those compounding burdens actually add up to a reasonable explanation that is to a certain extent outside of my control because I didn't put myself in that situation where I had to compensate in all of those ways. And now you multiply that over several black and brown kids who are statistically more likely to be in such situations that I described where they have to compensate in this way, right? Then you have a recipe for a whole bunch of systemic explanations and systemic factors that contribute to the quote unquote choices that they're making to not study. It's not a matter of laziness in a lot of cases. It's actually a matter of the practical burdens are actually obstacles, practical obstacles for them to actually do that. Now, on top of that, I'm going to be honest and I'm going to admit that some kids ain't studying because they don't have no goddamn discipline. They got plenty of time to study. That's a fact. And some of it is a little bit of the culture. Some of it is a little bit of the parenting styles. They don't have the way to hold their child accountable, maybe because they're at work, maybe because they don't want to be bothered at home, maybe because their discipline techniques are weak, whatever. That's a part of it too. And those are going to be a part of the explanations at a systemic level too, for sure. But like the subset of them that are as I described are not fitting your explanation. And so your
Yeah.
explanation is too broad because it doesn't apply to the situations such as I described. And I know for a fact that those situations exist because I taught the kids that lived under those conditions. And in fact, I was one of those kids when I was in high school. I had housing insecurity. I was literally homeless when I was 16. And I had a hell of a commute. And some days it would be longer than others because of traffic. So I had to get up at 4 a.m. every day so I could make the school by 6 because I had to be there for zero period, which is the period before first period. And I
Right.
was late to that shit every day. And that shit happened to me my trig pre-calc class, and I didn't do that well in that class for a couple of reasons. One, that time of the day, I wasn't really the most astute and alert because I was really, really tired and really, really sleepy. I wasn't really in the mood to learn math. And number two, I couldn't afford the kind of calculator that I needed in order to be able to do all the trig calculations.
Hmm.
Those are a lot of those things are out of my control. Now you could try to say that I'm lazy or some shit, but that wouldn't be a reasonable explanation for why I didn't do well in that class.
No, no, you're right. But what I'm hearing, a lot of the stuff you described, I grew up with. Like here, you could get public transit to school. You could drive to school if your parents have a car. We walk to school, okay? And the commute time to school, if you were walking. Now, I was blessed to have a bike. It would take me about 15 minutes to ride my bike. But kids would be walking for an hour to go to school. Okay. So you're walking out there, waking up hella early because you got to walk at least an hour to get to school. So you have that. And then most kids back home, the responsibilities of kids back home are more than the average responsibilities of kids in the United States. For example, my typical day, which is more privileged than a lot of other kids that I knew, I would get home from school. I would make sure my homework was done before I left school. By the way, school ends at 5, not 3. So I'm leaving school and I've been there since 7 o'clock. So school's ending at 5 o'clock. I make sure I get my homework done before 6 o'clock. So I'm getting my homework done as fast as possible before the sun goes down. I get on my bike, 15 minutes, I'm home. I go buy milk, come back home, make tea for my mom so I can go pick her up at the station. Then we walk back for like 30 minutes, from the station back to the house. And then she makes dinner. I have to do the chores around the house, help her out, finish, tidying up everything, wake up in the morning, get my stuff ready, shine my shoes. We wear a uniform to school. That's standard in Kenya. And that was just a daily life. Some kids would have other siblings, like you said. Guess what the life of my sisters was? What you just described. They had to take care of me. They were my parents when my dad moved to the States, and then we joined to the States. When my parents moved to Kansas City and we still lived in Joplin, guess who were my parents? My sisters. They took care of me. I didn't have a car. They drove me to school. My sister had 3 jobs to try to make ends meet. My other sister had a job at the school she was at, and they did what they had to do. They never complained. Not saying that they couldn't. They had all the room to complain if they wanted to, but
Uh-huh,
they knew what they had to do to make ends meet. And I think human beings understand that we're not going to live in a world where we have parity. Okay.
uh-huh,
At any point in time, you're going to have some people who are more salient than others. You're going to have some people who have better opportunity or better, yeah, opportunities than others. Right. And so when you have that reality, you have to work with what you got. But what I'm hearing today, especially in the United States, which kind of makes me sad, is people who have the wherewithal to really be successful given the cards that they have, and they use those cards as crutches to stay in the positions that they are in. Okay. Now, like you said, you have some students like you do who are in these really um, tough situations where they have to do adult things as kids to help the family make ends meet. Okay.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you're at that level of society, where you're at that level where you don't have all these stuff being given to you, or you haven't achieved the level of success yet that you want, you still have it within your mind that you have to work harder than the next guy that doesn't have to work as much harder because they're maybe already at that level. And so you do have to work harder. And so to me, it's not it there's so much opportunity, especially for kids. If you are poor, especially, education is usually, and especially in the past, education was like the ticket out of poverty. Get you an education. We saw this with the literacy rates of Black people just going to 50% within a generation after slavery. It was incredible, and so much progress happening in such a short amount of time because people now could like read, figure out like what other people are doing, innovate, all this stuff. But
But I'm trying to get you to like contend with, I think, a logical implication of everything that you're saying, because I think on some
yeah,
level you recognize that students who have these non-ideal circumstances
hmm
and are what I keep describing as under the conditions of poverty, because that's what comes hand in hand with that. It's like these situations in which, for practical reasons, you have to compensate in ways that other people who don't have those situations don't have to compensate, right?
yeah,
Like if you acknowledge that those kids have to work harder in order to be able to break even with their counterparts who don't have to work as hard to get those gains, then you're tacitly acknowledging what I was saying, which is that they're burdened in a way that people who don't have those circumstances are not burdened. That i.e. there are particular practical obstacles that they face that other people don't face, and a lot of
yeah,
them are systemically influenced, or
yeah,
the conditions for which are created by the systems, the systemic forces that they're in, or that they find themselves under, them and their parents. And if you
yeah.
acknowledge that, then it's easier to see why statistically people who are in those non-ideal situations are more likely to fail or drop out or not have the gains or successes academically by comparison to people who are not burdened in those ways.
Yeah, so a really nice case study to see this is immigrant groups, right? Most immigrants that come into this country are not rich. They're not well off. Okay. We literally don't have much. I'm an immigrant. I came to this country. We didn't have much. Okay. Um, we were on student visas. If I don't know if you know anything about student visas. But anyway, you come in this country, you can only work on campus, which is minimum wage. In Missouri is like 7.25, okay, 7.35 an hour. And you can't work off post, or not off post, but off campus. You can only work up to 20 hours a week because you have to be a full-time student in 15 credit or 12 credit hours. You there's so many limitations. Your tuition rate is going to be about 2 to 3 times the rate of an average citizen. Okay. And so you're contending with a lot. So what typically happens is you have immigrants who will, by virtue of the circumstances that they're in, either get a job that pays them under the table, or they'll find themselves like ruining their paperwork that way because it'll catch up. They'll either overstay their visa, they will something will have to give because if the amount of time you're not spending in school, you're probably spending working and paying for 2 times the tuition rate of your average counterpart, having to pay for gas, having to pay for your school stuff, having to pay for internet, insurance, all this crap, rent. It adds up. And so a lot of people end up being in a really tough situation where they have to either get a job that pays under the table, or they have to work extra, extra hard. Okay. Um, so the situation, or they become an illegal immigrant. That's the next thing. But the situation that my sister was in, we were lucky because my sister won the green card. lottery, and so she was able to work like 3 different jobs. But anyway, what I'm going back to is situations that we find ourselves in. We have no control if, especially we were born into it. You like, okay, you got to contend with it. But do we think about also the tough things that families that have a lot going for them have to contend with too? Okay, if you're talking about like a rich family, think about how easy it is for you to not care about your educational performance, not care about your personal success, because you're like, I'm already in a rich family. We're good. I don't have to work hard. You know, I get my stuff handed to me. Like, it's gonna be easy life. That's just as dangerous as the other person who is riddled with a lot of you know, socioeconomic issues that they have to contend with just to get to a point where they can uh provide for themselves and one day just be on their own. So we always think rich people are just like, or just well-to-do people are just like set and they don't have their own issues. We just think that just because you're poor, that all the problems are just reserved for the poor. But what I'm saying is, because we can't choose where we start off, most
But I,
people have the wherewithal to figure out the situations that they're in and work
Mhm.
hard to get out of those situations, get and set themselves up in better situations because of the conditions of where this country's in.
But
If
I'm
this
not I'm
country
not making I'm not making a mistake like that though. I'm not trying to deny that rich people have their own sets of problems or better, more even more middle class people who are in some sense better off economically in general than people who live below the poverty line don't have their own set of problems. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that statistically speaking, you're more likely as a person who's living under the poverty line or under conditions of poverty at all age levels to be burdened in ways that other people aren't burdened. And those burdens, a lot of times, create practical obstacles or challenges
sure.
for you to accomplish at a certain rate. And so, like, that is going to be implicated in our discussion for while we're trying to explain at a systemic wide level why certain populations of people who are statistically more likely to be under those conditions of poverty don't achieve as much academically,
That's a very small percentage of the population who are under the poverty line.
who
Very
live under the
small.
conditions of poverty.
Yeah, under the poverty line.
You could say it's a very small percentage of the population, but what I'm saying is they're
But it
statistically more
is.
likely to be black and brown people. So that
Okay. So
population is statistically more likely to be comprised of black and brown people. That's what I'm saying.
okay.
So like that
Okay.
has implications for achievement by race. And
So
that's and
so
that's
the question,
systemic in nature. That's not a function of it's not merely a function of choices. Although it does involve people making choices under those conditions. Like
yeah,
it's not going to
all the
be a
way through.
thorough or I'm not it's not going to be a complete analysis to say because these people made bad choices that accounts for why they didn't do as well, right? Like you got to take into account the conditions under which they made those decisions, the practical limitations and or challenges that came with those situations, and what bearing that had on their outcomes. And your
Yeah, but it's
explanations don't do that.
no, they do because regardless of where you start off from, right? Even if you start off at slavery and Jim Crow, you still have people within those time periods that were growing at a faster rate than people who didn't have to grow up with those things. Okay? You had major gains, like I said earlier. The poverty rate of black people was the greatest deceleration in history before all this other stuff, before Brown versus Board, civil rights movement, all that stuff.
But we already went over this. The explanation, the causal explanation, one of the biggest contributing factors to why the growth rate accelerated is because the particular practical limiting factor that was released off of black people in particular
Well,
was
it wasn't
first
released yet,
slavery. First was slavery,
right?
and that's one of the reasons why you had an accelerated gain right after that because for the first time black people
Yeah.
were actually enabled to actually like profit for themselves, so that was one of the biggest ones. And then and then that slowed right around the time of the civil rights movement. They were still making gains, but the rate slowed, right? And there was the explanation that I forget what it was, but there was the explanation that I gave for that. And then at one point, I think around the 1980s, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it actually reversed, and so it started
Mhm.
getting wider again. And there were explanations given for that, having to do with what percentage of of the most valuable homes were actually owned by black people versus by white people. It was one of the explanations, and another one was
Well, the only thing that
what
reversed.
percentage hold on, what percentage of assets were actually like stocks, because stocks enabled you to gain more money in a shorter period of time than just appreciating homes. And so statistically speaking, were black people were more likely to own homes than they were to own stocks that were wait whose value increased in that way. So that was one of it. And then also the conditions of the pandemic maximized and concentrated wealth into the hands of a few, and those top earners were already statistically more likely to be white anyway. So those are three explanations
So,
for
well,
those
the
trends.
only thing that reversed was the economic aspect. Okay,
What do
in
you
the
mean?
80s, that's the only thing that reversed. The Everything else after the 60s kept shooting up. Things were actually going on a decline from slavery through Jim Crow, and then all of a sudden, civil rights movement comes in, and you have these great reversals. Okay, now the question is again, in a time period where we don't have to guess and play nuance, where it's clear your you literally, hey, you can't drink from that fountain because you're black, right? Like it's in your face. Like, hey, you can't go to the school because you're not white. Okay, like when these things were so pronounced and you didn't have to guess as a black person, you have all these amazing gains. You have single motherhood rate going down. You have the greatest rates of marriage. You have income generation going up. You have wealth generation going up. You have, what do you call it? Um, uh, the crime levels going down in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And then you have these great reversals, single motherhood rate, all time low before the 60s. And then you have all these supposed wonderful programs when now black people have civil rights. Now black people have voting rights. Now black people have access to welfare and all this other good, stuff, affirmative action, all this stuff. And then you see all these great societal reversals. So I cannot buy into the argument that America today is worse off than in the pre 1960s in regards to discrimination, but it is certainly worse off societally in terms of the ramifications of our current society and climate and what we have decided to be the norm. We like back then there was shame in having children out of wedlock. There was shame in not marrying the person in which you're having children with. There was shame in just sleeping around. There's shame in these things. But when we've removed shame from culture, when we've removed shame from our country, guess what you have? Monsters in the making. You show me a nation in which you remove the experience of shame, and I'll show you monstrosity in its making. I'll show you a people who decide to do things because in their minds, there's no ramifications. Everything is a go. And that's kind of where we're at right now. It's like we want to blame history and we rarely ever look inward and say, well, what decisions did I make that are the result, that could be the result of where I'm at right now? Okay, I only make 30 grand a year. All right, I want to make 70 grand a year. Well, how can I put myself in position to make $70,000 a year or 80 or $100,000 a year? Have you looked at any options? Have you really looked at the options? We live in the age of information. You have the internet at the palm of your hands. You have access to more information than your ancestors could ever dream of. And now you're complaining that you don't have opportunity when you could literally get on an app and make money, when you could literally learn skills on Udemy for like 20 bucks, learn to be a graphic designer, software developer. You can learn all these skills for a crazy reduced price. Not even the price of college, not even close. So a lot of the things that people say that are inhibiting factors to their success, I just call cap on because honestly, in 2023, or just from the year freaking 2010, okay, or 2000, there's been way too much information out there in the world for people not to tap
Okay,
into.
but a lot of the practical obstacles or challenges are not just a matter of not having information, right? Like they're actually like such things as like how do I get from my house to school, or how do I get from my house to work in a timely manner if I don't have reliable transportation or whatever. And then a lot of the situations are situations which are compounded over time. So if I have to take public transportation over extended periods of time, and my commute is causing me stress because I'm worried about whether or not I'm going to make it on time. If I miss that first bus, I'm not going to make it on time because by the time I get to the second bus, blah blah blah, like all that kind of stuff. These are
Bro,
stress inducing factors,
that's
and
stuff
like
you could
that
figure out.
contributes. It's not
You
that you
could
can't
figure that
figure it
stuff
out. It's
out.
not even
Yeah.
that you can't persevere through it. What I'm saying is that it creates challenges and obstacles that are
Yeah, if you don't figure it out.
that explain why not everybody succeeds. That's all I'm
Yeah, if
saying.
you don't figure it out, you're gonna have to keep facing those obstacles. But if you are in
Okay,
those
fine,
situations,
but
it
what
behooves
I'm
you to
talking
figure
about
it
an
out.
explanatory model for why people don't achieve. People of certain populations who are statistically more likely to be in these situations don't achieve.
Yeah,
This is
well, if you're gonna point to
I'm
something like
not
commute
interested
time,
in making excuses for people. I'm
I'm
not
not either.
interested. Okay, fine, but that's not what I'm doing. I'm explaining how there are these trends in outcomes. I'm not trying to say that these trends and outcomes are explained away by
Well, that's
oh,
what
it's
you
just a
just did,
system and
by
I can't.
commute
No,
time and
I
all
didn't. No, I didn't. That's what you heard. What I did
that.
was explained
You ju Yeah,
what I explained what caused the outcomes and the relationship
okay.
that that has the systemic forces that are out of people's control. That's what I
Yeah,
did.
but okay, so when you explain it and you offer it as an explanation, I'm saying that's an excuse. If you're
It's
gonna
not an
tell me that.
excuse.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
not an
If you
excuse,
if you're gonna
dude.
tell me that commute time is what's causing you not to
No, I'm saying
succeed
that
in
that is
school,
one example of the kind of
okay,
systemic
I'm
factors
saying that particular
that create
example is an
obstacles for
excuse.
people to succeed. And
Uh,
what I'm trying to point to you is this is the sense in which these trends,
mhm.
which we see have disparities by race, okay, are not are not explained entirely by people's choices. That's what I'm trying to get you to see. You're trying to explain away the explanation by saying that people made choices, therefore it's their
No,
fault. It's like
absolutely. Yeah.
motherfuckers didn't choose to be in those situations under which they made choices, though.
Well, their parents did, and if
Okay,
their
but
parents didn't,
that's not on
then their
them.
parents'
They're not
parents did.
culpable for their parents' choices either.
No, absolutely it is. At some point, you have to figure out.
Why am I at fault for the choices my parents made? That doesn't
No, I'm
make
not
sense.
saying you're at fault for the choices your parents did. You're at fault for the choices you make. You have to account for the trade-offs you have to make in your current life. So if you were born in a place that is far away from your school and you have no control over where you live and because you're a kid and you have no control about your commute time, guess what you have to figure out? You have to tell your parents, "Hey, my school," and if you have good parents, your parents should be smart enough to figure out, well, my kid has to get to school, like its commute time is like
Okay,
40
but
minutes.
you're all you're doing
They
is
will
making
figure
a
it out.
case. All you're doing is making a case for people to have resilience and grit as they try to navigate their not ideal circumstances, which is something that I actually generally agree with you on. But what I'm saying is there's a certain sense in which you're being like a little bit insensitive to the practical realities that puts people in and the burdens that come with that. And it is unrealistic to expect everybody to just bootstrap their way through their non-ideal circumstances
That's
because
what you gotta have to do in life is bootstrap
some
yourself.
people are gonna fucking fail, bro. That's just the
Yeah, they
reality.
are.
And
Absolutely.
when you assess or evaluate a systemic wide set of these kinds of circumstances, the people who have the most burdens are the people who are the most likely statistically to fail. And those people happen to be black and brown people through no fault of their own. So that's what I'm trying to tell you is like that's a problem. And the sense in which it's systemically racist is that involves a lot of passive things that are creating the conditions under which people make decisions. Sometimes they're bad decisions, but they're decisions that are made under not ideal circumstances nonetheless. And that's the thing that the people who care about systemic racism are concerned with. They're not concerned with making excuses for people's dumbass decisions. They're concerned with the situations that maximize the likelihood that people were going to either make bad decisions and ultimately have bad outcomes.
Yeah. I don't think that, people just who have more burdens are the people who fail the most in life.
They're most
Uh,
likely to. They're most
okay,
likely
most
to.
likely to fail. Well, I heard this quote, and hopefully it resonates with you. It says that lazy people put in a little bit of work and then they wonder why they're not successful, right? But successful people put in a ton of effort and they still wonder if they're being lazy. Okay,
Okay,
like
this is not. Why are
the
you lecturing me on laziness? I'm
no,
not
no, 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 no.
endorsing laziness.
Because, dude, when you are in like you can't, like you said, you can't pick what family you're born into, where you're
Yeah,
born. Like you
yeah,
can't pick these things. These are lotteries of life, right? So if you can't pick it, dude, you have a hand. Play it. You gotta play it.
dude. If but the hand that you're dealt is out of your control,
Absolutely. But
and it
you can
has and it
change.
has and
You
it
can
has an impact on whether or not your hand is gonna win.
nope.
Yes,
No.
the cards that you're dealt have a direct impact on
Okay.
whether or not you're gonna win. What are you
Okay.
talking about?
So okay. So your hand basically dictates whether you can win or not. So if I'm
Yes,
born in a so you give me a situation where I am it's fatal. My situation is fatal based on what the circumstances that I'm in, right?
uh-huh,
On an average level, right? Give me an
uh-huh.
average like poor person's life and you tell me that that cards that they're dealt means that they're not going to win.
No, I didn't say that they're not gonna win. I said that
You
I
said they're
said
not going
they're
to win.
no, I said that they're more likely not
You
to
didn't say
win
more
if
likely. You said they're not
yes,
going to
I
win.
did. I did say that. I said that they're more I've been saying that consistently this entire time. And I gotta go soon. But I've been saying that they're more likely
Yeah.
not to have good outcomes if they're dealt a bad hand. That's obviously true. This is true literally in like poker or whatever, where this metaphor comes from. If you're dealt a bad hand, you're not likely to win that round or whatever.
Not
That's just a
likely,
true
right?
statement. Not
Doesn't
likely.
mean you can't.
It doesn't mean you
Yeah.
can't. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. We're agreeing on that. It doesn't mean that
Yeah.
you can't overcome the obstacles. It doesn't mean that
Yeah.
you can't overcome the bad hand. It doesn't mean that you
Yeah.
can't get creative and make the best out of a bad situation.
I
So
love
what I'm
this,
saying is,
Jason. Boy.
okay, no, but that's consistent with what I'm pointing out, which is this. Statistically, if you're dealt a whole bunch of bad hands over and over again, you're not likely to be that successful, bruh. That's just a fact.
Actually, you're not dealt a bunch of bad hands in life, statistically. Okay.
No. If
It-
I'm talking, no, I'm not talking about one person being dealt a bunch of bad hands. I'm talking about a
okay.
whole bunch of people being dealt a bunch of bad hands systemically.
Okay. So again, a bunch of black people are not being dealt. Majority of black people are not being dealt a
A
bad hand.
significant subset of the black population are being dealt a bad hand
No,
systemically. Yes, they are.
a majority of them are
Because they're
not.
living under the circumstances that are not likely to
A
find good
majority of
outcomes.
them, Jason, are not. Okay.
Okay,
Less
but
than
I'm a
20%.
significant amount of them are.
Less than 20% of the black population lives in poverty.
That's a fifth of the black population, dude.
Yes. Yes.
That's a
You're
lot of black people.
you're absolutely right, okay?
That's a
But
fifth
look,
of 40
oh
million
my
people,
gosh.
dude.
Okay. Think about it like this. You
That's
have the
8
group of
million black people,
okay,
dude.
how many of those black people are making stupid decisions? How many of those black people
That's
decide to go
4
into field
times the prison population,
Ho
bro.
hold on. How many of those black people decide to go into fields that don't yield high income?
I don't
Okay?
know.
How many of those what
I
percentage of
don't
those
know.
black people
First
go
of
into
all,
the high income
it's
yielding
not
fields?
necessarily even a matter of deciding.
Bro,
They may not be even be eligible to even apply to those kinds of things.
that's not true.
Yes.
No.
Do you know what the basic requirements to be able to get admitted to an
Okay.
engineering program are?
So, okay. Please tell me what the basic requirements for getting into an
Up
engineering major
until recently,
from high school.
you needed to get a certain minimal. Well, it depends on the particular school you're applying to be fair, but in general, you need to be able to get a decent ACT or SAT score. Up until very recently, where some programs decided to nix that, right?
Yeah, so
You needed to be able to you need to be able to do that,
for
and
some
that's
schools.
tied directly to test scores.
Mhm.
Yeah, you also
So
the best schools
most
though the schools that have the most opportunity are the ones that we're talking about, right?
no. I'm talking about if you if you were dealt a bad hand, because those are the kinds of people we're talking about, right? You're
Uh-huh.
dealt a bad hand,
Uh-huh.
education's you're out,
Uh-huh.
okay? If you're extraordinary, you'll probably get into a state school or an Ivy League, okay? But if you are average, you can get to any college that has an engineering major.
You can't get to any college, but you can get to a
Bro,
lot of them because
okay.
not all of them
What
are as prestigious as the
they
Ivy
may
Leagues.
not, of course, they're not as prestigious, but that doesn't mean you can't get into them.
Okay, all I'm trying to point out is that so you're generally right. I'm trying to preserve the essence of your point. You're generally right in that there's a bunch of programs that a person who's average in terms of their test scores and stuff can get into, because those programs are not going to be as prestigious by comparison to like the Ivy Leagues or the most prestigious programs, engineering programs that offer. So you're right about that part.
Yeah,
But
they
like,
can get in, use it as a foot in the door to get to the Ivy League or to a state
yeah,
school
and
at least.
some of them have a route through community college even too, so
That's
they can go there and transfer.
actually the major key. For a lot of people in
Or they could go
poverty,
to a trade school
community
in the first place.
say what?
Or they could go to a trade school in the first place.
Absolutely, and those are great and underrated, but community colleges are amazing at at creating an environment for people, especially with very low income, to catapult themselves forward, and the college courses that you can take in high school to set yourself up to where you already have an associate's by the time you're graduating high school. I have a bunch of friends who did that, and like these are opportunities that are clearly available, in public schools that you can take advantage of. And then by the time you get in community college, you're spending way less time in college, maybe 2 years, you're graduating with a bachelor's, while your other friends have to spend the next 4 years trying to do the same thing. It's like people who are actually have a devotion to success in any field, they take a considerable amount of time brainstorming of all possible options, right? So like a parent that cares, they'll be like, "Dude, I don't have much money, but dude, I can figure it out for my kid. Like I'm gonna have to figure it out. Like what school to send them, like what opportunities I can get, what grants are available, like if I can get a tutor, like what tutors are pro bono, like all kinds of stuff, community programs. You will figure it out. And most parents, I'll give this, like most parents want the best for their kid. And if you're a decent parent, you're gonna you're gonna bend over backwards just for your kid.
I mean, yeah, I get that, but like poor people can't afford tutors like that.
Well, no, I'm saying
That's an obstacle for
there's
them.
a lot of opportunities even for poor families to get a proper education. Like
I'm not
in
denying
terms
that
of
there are
those three,
opportunities.
there's
I'm simply trying to establish that one of the biggest contributing factors to people having bad outcomes in terms of their education are the non-ideal circumstances under which they are educated, and they usually are correlated highly with the conditions of poverty. That's just the truth. That's just the truth, dude. Generally, it doesn't apply universally, because the vast majority of Black people, in particular, aren't even in poverty or not living under the conditions of poverty,
right. That's what
right?
I said earlier.
But 8 million out of the 40 are, though. That's a lot of Black people.
Yeah.
Okay, like it
I
ain't a
mean,
trivial
what's the
amount.
percentage of poverty in white people?
Less than that. It's less. It's less than it is for Black people.
Yeah. So it's like
It ain't
when
twenty
you
percent. It's like, isn't it like 5%? Something, I don't know how. I don't. It's small.
yeah, but then look at it as a proportion of their population. They're much
They may
bigger
have a. They
population.
have. Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. So they may have a bigger raw number,
Yeah.
but
So
it's
at,
gonna
at
be
the
a.
end of the day,
It's gonna
it's
be a
like,
smaller percentage, though. Is my point.
yes, there's
which
a
is
smaller
why
percentage.
statistically white people are more likely to have good outcomes. That's the point.
So
So like that's
it's
part
not
of an explanation of the trends that does not involve just bad choices, and that's why your analysis to me is not a good one, because it
well,
doesn't account for the things that are outside of people's locus of control.
well, of course it accounts for everything that's outside of their control.
How could it
Like
if it's about
I
what they
already
can
said,
control in
you
terms of
don't
their
get to
choices?
choose your lottery. Like you don't get to choose where you're born, who your parents are, how much money you guys
But
got.
this
You don't get to
okay.
choose that stuff. But
Right,
you
but
can
the
definitely
systemic
influence after
factors
that.
determine that, though, in a lot of cases.
Yeah, but after you get your hand, like in poker, you have the ability to change
But
the
the systems is the dealer. That's the point I'm making. The
yeah,
system deals you the cards.
except the system isn't dealing bad hands to people
Yes, it
left and right.
is.
No, it's
It
not.
is. It is. Yes, it is. It quite literally is. It quite literally is. The
No,
system is
it's not.
literally, yes, it is. It literally
Okay.
is dealing bad hands
All
to
right.
people.
So, Jason, if the system, so systems are built to influence the majority of people who go through them, right?
Yes.
Okay. So if a system is built like I want to build a car company, if I roll out a bunch of cars out the assembly line and like 90% of them have to get recalled every single time,
Right.
then that's a pretty unsuccessful car company
Right.
because your
What if
stuff
only
sucks, right?
10% have to get recalled?
Quality control.
What if only
If
10?
it's a
What if
school,
only flip it? What if only 10% have to get recalled?
Well, if only 10% have to get recalled, then guess what? That means
What?
that's a pretty successful company
Right,
because
but the
the
people who
vast
got the car that needed to be recalled got a bad hand, right? They
the
got dealt
no
a
no no
bad hand. What do you
the
mean
yes
no?
yeah the people who got the people who got the bad cars
Got dealt a
got
bad hand
dealt a bad hand.
with no
But
fault of
the
their own.
sys-
Through no fault of their own.
no, check it out, check it out. The system didn't give them a bad hand.
The
Does
system
that make
literally
sense?
produced the system
So
literally
it didn't
produced
pick and
the
choose.
bad
Hold on,
car.
Jason.
No, it
This
didn't. It didn't. It didn't. It didn't like say, "Oh, I hate you, so here's a bad car." It didn't do that. It just
yeah,
churned. It just churned out a bad outcome
an inefficient
that some
product. Yeah,
unfortunate poor soul is gonna have to deal with and mitigate.
yeah.
That's what systems do. That's what
That's
they
what's it.
do.
Yeah. Okay. So perfect. You're following me. Great. So now that we've established that even a system that pushes out 10% failure, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It still sucks for the people who have to deal with a little failure, right?
exactly.
But you also contend with the reality that there are no perfect systems ever in history, right?
Of course.
Every system has its own blind spots, failures,
Right.
parts that you need
But what if the
optimize.
people who got the bad cars were disproportionately black and brown? That
Right.
would be
So,
systemic
so
racism.
that would be systemic racism. Because
Yes.
guess what? Because guess what? If you find that pretty much every car that is getting recalled was sold to a black person, then you know that hey, we got to look deeper. That doesn't mean it's racism. But if hold on, hold on. The way you find out if it was actually racist is if you find out that this car was sold to a black person because they were black. If because it could also be a coincidence
No,
that out of the
no, stop it.
hold on.
Yo, you're reading intent. That's not the
It
intent is
could
not
be a
no, the
coincidence.
intent
So
is not relevant.
you're
Intent is
telling
not
me that a
relevant.
coincidence cannot happen that out
No,
of
of course it
100
could,
cars
but it would still
sold,
be
10
systemically
were sold to
racist if
black people
if it was
that
a
happen to be
total
faulty.
coincidence. If it was a total coincidence, right? Let's say it was like it would still be considered systemically racist insofar as it's producing disparate outcomes by race,
No, it
right?
wouldn't,
It
because
wouldn't
that's not the
necessarily
definition of
it
systemic
wouldn't
racism.
necessarily be racist in the sense that you're trying to invoke, which is that
No, by
somebody
definition,
somewhere
which
went
is wrong.
deliberately, I hate black people, so I'm gonna sell them all the bad cars.
No,
That's what you're
because
talking
check
about.
it out,
That's
right?
not what I'm
You
talking about. I'm talking
you
about the
live
fact that there was just disproportionate outcomes by race, and nobody did anything in the system to correct those outcomes, despite the fact that they have been identified. That is an
yeah.
indictment on that
So
system.
so check it out, right? Um, even that system with the car thing, dude. If you live in in a community where if you're black, you're probably living amongst mostly black people. If you're buying a car, guess who else is buying cars? Other black people. And so if the kind of car that you're driving is probably similar to a lot of other black people who are driving the car, guess what? If most of the cars getting recalled happen to be bought by black people, and you just jump and you just, guess what? 100% of all the cars that just got recalled in freaking my city are all bought by black people. It's like, dude, have you cared to look at the whether that was just a coincidence based on or a high likelihood based on the population, or
You're
are you just jumping to the conclusion? I do agree that if a car company, if a dealer is strictly selling vehicles with a nefarious intention of giving faulty vehicles to black people, that is systemic
no
racism because it affects black
the
people
outcomes
on a
could be
systemic level.
systemically racist and also be intentional. Excuse me, unintentional. They can be systemically racist, but also be unintentional. They can be inadvertent,
How
but
can they be
also
unintentional?
because systemic racism doesn't necessarily mean that there is either one or several people who are intentionally trying to harm groups of people by race.
So how can you claim any racism if it's not intentional?
Because the system is producing the disparate outcomes by race.
So it's
And
intentional.
despite the fact, no, it doesn't have to be, it can be inadvertent. But despite the fact that those systemic outcomes that are disproportionately negatively impacting certain racial groups have been identified, if nothing has been done about it for an extended period of time when it's reasonable to expect something could have been done about it, that's an indictment on those systems because those systems are
It's not,
producing
no.
negative outcomes that are disproportionately affecting certain groups rather than others.
Okay,
And
again,
there's an argument that can be made that if you stand back and allow a system to continue to do that and don't do anything, then you're in some sense enabling the disproportionate outcomes by race to continue. So I think that would be a way of indicting a system like that. And that would be the way that I would argue against systemically oppressive or racist systems in our society
Well,
that aren't necessarily intended to be that way.
for the 100th time, simply pointing out to a disparate outcome does not mean systemic anything.
It's
Like,
systemically disproportionately negatively impacting racial groups. That's a fact. Like we
okay,
have systems that do that.
you have an outcome that you see that is disparate from another outcome for another group of people. That does not mean it is systemized. That does not also mean that it's racist. Simply because you see a disparity between groups of people does not draw a conclusion of racism or systemic racism. Again, the definition of racism is believing that one race is superior to another and acting accordingly. This
Yeah, but
definition of systemic racism,
if you have systemic negative outcomes that are disproportionately affecting Black and brown people, and you
it
do
does
nothing
not
about it,
mean
then
no.
what would be the other conclusion to draw but that?
Interest, choice. Like
So
there's
you're
all
just not
sorts.
interested, or you're not real willing to choose better systems that are more equitable.
Yeah, that's also part of it. Like if you
Well,
look at
why
if you
wouldn't
if
you
you
choose
if,
that unless you were racist?
no. Think about it like this. Why is it that we don't complain about the like we talked about earlier, the fields in which black people are overrepresented? Why don't Asians
I
and
gave
white
you an
people complain? Hold
explanation.
on. Why don't they complain that they're underrepresented in the NBA, the NFL, in music, in entertainment? Why don't they complain because they're underrepresented, even though they're a majority of the population? Why don't we draw the conclusion that the NBA is systemically racist against white people and Asians? Because black people, being only 13% of the population, are a major overrepresentation based on the percentage of population. Why don't we get to those conclusions?
I think one of the reasons why people don't complain that often is because there's so few domains where Black people actually are overrepresented in the first place in a way that's positive.
No, it's
Yes.
because everybody knows that black people put a ton of effort, and it shows in the fields in which they put a
Well,
ton of effort.
but it's not just effort though. It's also prowess. Like Black people are really fucking good at sports, and one of the reasons why is because
Why are they good at sports?
One of the reasons why is because Black people were literally bred to be fucking specimens so that they could have their labor extracted for free by their white slave owners.
And
And
what group of
generations of
people?
breeding, generations of literally breeding Black people has cultivated athletic prowess of an order that's fucking incredible and is highly valued in the world of professional sports. So
Okay.
there's that's a big part of the explanation.
And
But
what group of people?
the other is that Black people genuinely, and because of this, outcompete other groups in these domains. They grow bigger,
Okay.
they grow taller, they jump higher, they run faster in general than these other groups for this reason.
Yeah, but how much time and effort is spent by black people in
A
sports
lot, a lot,
contrary to other groups?
a lot,
Exactly.
a
So
lot. But one
the
of the
better
reasons, wait, but one
question,
of the reasons
Jason.
for that is because Black people start off better, and so it actually cultivates or multiplies their willingness to have spend that much effort to get to the level of the pros. By the time they get to the level of the pros, they've weeded out all of the other groups most
Wait,
of the
you're
time.
saying black people start off at a better level physically?
Yeah, they win the physical lottery almost always. Like somebody
Um,
like Shaquille O'Neal
so
is born with a whole bunch of physical attributes
yeah, how many
that
Shaquille
are
O'Neals you know of?
he, there's not a lot of Shaquille O'Neals. My point is,
Exactly.
he's just one
But
example.
how many people with the
Let me
same
finish the point.
specimen
Let me
as
finish. Let me finish the point. That like you're very unlikely to have a Shaquille O'Neal in a white body, bruh. That's the point.
No, that's not true.
Yes, it is true.
Dude,
You're very unlikely to
have
have a
you seen the
Shaquille O'Neal in a white
strongman?
body.
Have you seen the
Yes,
strongman
dude. It's not
competition?
just that Shaquille O'Neal is strong. He has a combination of physical
No,
attributes.
I get that. But when you're saying like a specimen, right? Like
Yes,
it's
but a particular
the
set of
general distribution,
skill sets.
the general
It's not just a
distribution.
big black dude
Okay, cool.
who's
The general
strong.
distribution, because you have other big white guys in the NBA that you don't see a lot of either.
Yes, but they're not as strong. They don't have the skill sets that Shaq has. Name one white dude in NBA history that had the skill set that Shaq had. Name one.
What? I'm not really good with sports people, but Nowitzki,
Dirk
uh,
Nowitzki did not have the skill set that Shaquille
freaking Bird, like these guys
Larry
are
Bird. Did
These
not have
guys
a,
are legends,
a
right?
Shaq.
Like these guys are legends.
Yes,
Like put
Larry
the
Bird is
stats
great
up.
and Dirk Nowitzki are great. They're great white players. They're great players. So nobody
Put them
denies that. But they're
put
not
Bird
Shaq, bro. Come on,
Bird and
stop it.
Shaq
Stop it, bro. Stop it.
on the competition. Put the stats up. Maybe you
Bro,
show me the stats later.
Bird wasn't even as tall as Shaq. He was not as big as Shaq. He was not as strong as Shaq, and he was
But
not as
what were their
quick
stats?
at that size and
What were
frame
their
as
stats?
Shaq. I don't know what their stats were.
Oh, okay.
I don't know off the top
Well,
of my head.
well, here's the
Larry
thing, right?
Bird was a better shooter
You
than
have
Shaq was. Go
we
ahead.
both know this to be true. The vast majority of black people will never look like Shaq, right? Like that's just a reality.
There's
Let's
a
look at the
lot. There's a
general.
you're a lot more likely to have the physique of Shaq as a black dude than you are as a white dude. Is my point.
Look at the general distribution of the average NBA player. All right. Let's look at like a Steph Curry or Kyrie Irving or whoever, right? Like that is a specimen that you can find in pretty much almost any race. You can find that in Asians. You could find that in white people. You could find that in mixed people. You could find that in black people. You can find that whoever, right? Hispanics. But guess what? The general distribution of interest in basketball is very skewed because black people and mixed people.
But even their skill sets are rare. Their physique, maybe you can find some an
Yeah,
approximation
their
with the
skill
right
sets
body.
are rare, but
But
skills are
their skill
learned.
sets are extremely
They're all
yes.
learned.
So skill sets. So
Steph
to a
didn't
certain
come out
extent,
the womb shooting threes.
right. So to a certain extent, those skill sets are learned, but to a certain extent, there's foundational athletic attributes that enable a lot of those. So the fact that Kyrie Irving is as quick as he is actually a largely a part of function of his genetics, as well as the skills that he's honed. So it's a
I mean,
combination.
no one's gonna argue about like basic genetics. What I'm saying is that when you look at the likelihood of someone or a group of people achieving high level success in anything, the biggest factor to look at is the amount of effort and interest disparity there is. Okay,
I
because
don't think that that's true. I don't think that's the biggest at
so
all.
then
I
find
think
me
that the
one
systemic factors.
example, dude.
I just
No,
gave
no,
you
no.
like a dozen examples this
No, you
entire
didn't.
conversation,
No,
and I
no, no.
gotta go.
This was the
Yes,
question I asked you
I
the first
did,
time. I said, "Show me
dude.
one example
Dude,
of a
I,
group
I
of
can't
people."
show you one isolated example if we're talking about systems, dude.
Okay, you're making the statement that it's not because they didn't work hard enough. It's not because they
No,
didn't
I'm saying
put as
that that
much.
is not that explanation does not account for a large subset of cases. Is what I'm saying.
So, if it doesn't, show me an example where a group of people, and this is my thesis, a group of people who put more sweat equity and determination in any category, yet they achieve less than another group of people who put way less time in that category.
I don't know what to do with that. Like
Well, you don't because it
what?
doesn't exist. Like the reason
I
why.
don't even know how that jives with what I've been saying this entire time. It's like
Well,
not even
all I'm
relevant.
saying is the reason why we see black people
Put
excelling
sweat
in the
equity
fields in
into
which they
something and
excel.
didn't achieve as much as somebody else who didn't put any sweat equity into it.
Yes, like show me a group of people who put a lot of time in a particular industry, particular job, career field, right?
Okay. How about slaves? They put hella sweat equity into all of the shit that they were required to do, and they didn't reap any of the benefits from that shit that they probably
Oh,
could have.
no, check it out. So they were slaves, right?
Mhm.
So they were slaves more than white people were slaves or Asians in the
Yes.
country, right? Okay,
Yes.
so if that's true, what were they trying to achieve?
Not dying by the hands of their slave owners, not getting punished, not being dismembered, not
Okay,
being
so what
sold.
are we talking about then?
Like I'm
What
saying, like the
did
labor, the sweat equity that they put into cultivating cotton or growing tobacco or whatever, reaping the harvest of sugarcane
uh-huh.
or whatever the fuck that they did. Like the people who were over them, it wasn't a function of merit. It was a function of the fact that they were like subjugating people.
Okay, so that's not the argument as who's above who. The argument is who show me a group of people, and by the way, maybe I should qualify. Show me a group of free people, okay? Because we're living today where no one's a slave, okay, virtually. No one's a slave. But show me a group of people today who are free to, live their life, who pursue something and put more sweat equity than another group of people, yet fail at a considerable rate than that other group but that puts way less time into it and sweat equity?
I don't know, people who don't have privilege by comparison to people who do have privilege. So like the people who
Show me
have
an
the
example. Like, give me
connections.
something.
I mean, you have a person who works their butt off, I don't know, to try to get a really, really nice CEO job, but it goes to, the brother's cousin of somebody that the family knows who happens to be a white dude, even though he doesn't even really care about the job that much. He just has
Okay.
the connections
So
that the other
that's a
person doesn't
sucky
have.
example because I asked, show me a
Why?
group of people, right? Like, I'm not talking about show me an individual example of nepotism
Okay, but then
or
then take
discrimination.
the whole of all of the people such as I described. That
Well,
would be the
that
group of
actually
people.
doesn't happen writ large. Firstly, because
The fuck?
the business in a business, you don't want to just put your brother in charge, especially if they're not meriting the qualifications of running the company. You'll run your
Why not?
company
If you know them and you trust them, so
because you'll run the if they don't
nepotism doesn't
merit,
happen. Nepotism
dude.
doesn't happen.
Nepotism does happen, of
Okay, so that's
course.
what I'm talking about. I'm
Yeah,
talking about
and
that.
by the way, I'm an advocate for nepotism if people are
There
qualified.
you go, bro.
No, seriously,
Look,
if you're
all
qualified,
I'm saying is that might be an example of the kind of thing you're talking about. Is like groups of people who have worked and put a lot of effort into trying to achieve a certain status or a certain position, and because of nepotism or some shit, they don't get it. Take
no,
the whole of
no,
all of those people. I feel like
no.
that would be an example that satisfies your complaint.
So check it out, right? Like, if I have a company, right? And my son, I have raised him and I have mentored him to take over my company, mentored him to become the best at the game. And then there's another guy who's maybe at par with my son. Who do you think I'm gonna pick?
I don't know. The
No, well,
person,
who
the
would you pick?
nepotism, you make the nepotistic pick.
No,
Apparently,
who would you pick
out of who?
out of your son, who is extremely qualified, versus another stranger who's applying for the same position, who's just as qualified, or maybe slightly more qualified? Who are you picking?
Depends. Uh, I mean, no, it
Okay, I'll
really
tell you
depends.
who I pick, right? I'll tell you who I pick. I pick my son. Okay.
Okay.
Family comes first, especially if they're qualified. Now, I'll give you another scenario. Say my son didn't care one bit about my business, right? He just cared about self. He was selfish, you know, didn't really care about the business. But we have this other guy who's a stranger, really, really loves our mission, really cares about getting this company to the next level, and he's supremely qualified. Guess who I'm picking? Not my son. Okay. So where does
Okay, but
nepotism come into play? Nepotism is only makes sense to me when merit is involved. If
okay,
merit is
fine. But
not involved,
there are a lot of examples where mayor's not involved and nepotism still takes place. So the only point I'm making is that seemed to
sure, I
satisfy your
agree with
constraint. But
that.
you were trying to act like 20 seconds ago, you were trying to act like that never happens. Like, I don't know,
No, I
man.
was just saying you haven't showed me one example of people, a group of people, because you keep going on an individual, like, oh,
I
look at this
literally
person,
just
look at
said
this
the
position.
whole of the people such as I described, all of them.
Yeah,
Like
well,
that's a
those
group of
people,
people.
that is not the general distribution of CEOs as nepotism. That is, like, by the way, you should know, if you look at the CEO positions of companies, they shift all the time. CEOs get hired from this company to this other company because of their skill set. They're like, okay, this guy is good at running these type of companies. And so they'll get hired for this company across the country over here. They'll be with them 5 years, be with them for 6 years, be with them for 3 years, be with them for 10 years because they're really good at their particular position. Has nothing to do with nepotism for most
That's
of them.
interesting because I just found an article. This is gonna be the last one that I show that says different. It's from the Guardian. They're left leaning for whatever that's worth, but they think that they have a way of measuring nepotism. And if I tried very hard, I could probably find a better article. To be honest with you, I should have never. Uh, all right. So Measuring nepotism, is it more prevalent in the U.S. than other countries? By age 30, about 22% of American sons will be working for the same employer at the same time as their fathers. But how does that compare with other countries? Uh,
So I think it's
all right. The study finds that fathers and sons work together at the same employer more commonly than would be predicted by mere chance. That chance part is important, not least because when people get caught, they might claim it was coincidence rather than corruption. According to its analysis of the data from a survey of income and programming participation, the Census Bureau found that by the time they're 30, about 22% of sons will be working for the same employer at the same time as their fathers. Add an extra 6% of sons for an employer that their dads recently worked but left. That's a lot higher than I would have thought, but maybe I had lower expectations. All right, so find out if nepotism is more or less common elsewhere in the world. Had to find a PDF floating on the internet, ask for help, remember the results. Okay, so she finds something I didn't. The table is mentioned in this research paper. There's a couple things to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind. Okay, that's it. This is interesting. It ranks countries on their levels of nepotism. I suggest you pursue the full list. Okay, see the list. Countries ranked in terms of nepotism. I want to see where the United States ranks. Bruh. Never mind. Guess we're not gonna get it.
so
The
like
graphic
I
on the
think
article criticism. Okay,
I think
I
the
don't know.
distinction really is like the kind of nepotism, because nepotism can be horrible if it's not merit based, and it can also be horrible if you have bad family relationships. You know, like holding relatives responsible or accountable is extremely difficult, right? Because like you got that familial fraternization and stuff. But when you have a really high functioning family, it is a lot easier to actually create um, successful nepotism, handing down. Like think about family owned businesses. That's all nepotism.
The U.S. has a score of 4.2, putting it in 63rd place out of 125 countries evaluated. Behind Kazakhstan, Egypt, and South Africa, to give you just a few arbitrary examples, and way behind Germany and the UK, to give a few more. Czech Republic, where Ivanka's mother was born, received the same score as the United States. I really want to see this list now. I guess I can't. All right. Well, I guess the in the United States are ranked 62nd for whatever that's worth. Um,
That's because we actually have some of the most successful companies in the world where you can't be successful playing the negative nepotism. This is what I call it. There's positive nepotism, there's negative nepotism. Negative is where you just don't care. You just want to like keep the family name in the business. And so you do it at all costs. And then you end up with huge negative ramifications, especially if it becomes public. Um, and then if you have like bad family relationships, it becomes very ugly because it's really hard to like hold your brother responsible or hold your cousin or your aunt and uncle, you know. But when you have complete strangers who love your company and they just want to use their skill set to further, that company and get paid well for it, it's very easy to hold those people accountable versus your own family members. So there's positive nepotism if you have very, very well high functioning families.
all
And I really honestly, I see this a lot in
right, I'm about to.
Asian families. Like I have a buddy, he's from Nepal, and he's always telling me like cuz I saw this in Kenya growing up. Like Indian families, dude, they'll come to Kenya and they'll buy a mansion, right? And you're just like, how do they afford this mansion? But there's like 15 people living in it, right? 15 people, sometimes 20, living in a big old house, right? And they're each paying like 50, $100 a month, So it's like super affordable for each person. And they're able to save all that revenue because in America, what happens is as soon as somebody becomes an adult, all of a sudden everybody's like, YOLO, I'm gonna go find my own apartment. So you got like if you got like three siblings, everybody's paying like 2-3 grand a month. It's like, bro, you could be saving 2-3 grand a month, maybe 6 grand a month if y'all live together. You know what I'm saying? And you could start a business and you could scale that business, and they work together. And then as soon as somebody gets married and has kids, they move out, and then they bring more people in, and it just keeps going from there. And then they take over a whole street, and it's like they know how to work together. So that kind of nepotism works because they keep it within the family, and they have very well-oiled family machines, right? But if you don't have well-oiled family machines that are very cohesive, you will be in a world of hurt just giving out positions of your company to family members just cuz. Like FTX. Freaking, let me give my girlfriend like the president of this, multi-billion dollar company, to manage all these funds, and she has no qualification in doing any of that stuff.
Yeah. All right, man, we got to wrap it up. Question I asked.
All right, so we're gonna wrap it up. Jason lost.
No, hell no. You. So we gotta wrap it up. But question I asked everybody on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being this is the most awesomest podcast episode you've ever done. 1 being the worst. What would you rank this podcast episode?
Of course, it's the most awesome episode, dude.
You just say that because I promoted you. I promoted you at the beginning. All right, and then the last question.
I forgot about that, dude. That's crazy.
Hey, that's gold right there. That's gonna be gold right there. Can't wait till everybody see that shit. And then the last question is scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very likely, 1 being not likely at all. How likely are you to actually come back and get bodied again on another podcast episode?
Yeah, man. Hey, man. If I'm free, dude, we can work out a time. I'll be back. Well,
you're not pursuing your. Okay, when you're not pursuing your illustrative singing career.
Yeah, when I'm not, when I'm not out there doing the thing, you know what I'm saying?
Singing Purple Rain and shit. That's funny. All right, man. Any final words you want to say to the audience before we dip?
Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for tuning in to Black News Podcast. Amazing podcast. Thanks, Jason, for having me on. If you guys want like awesome content, where we really go on deep dives and see different perspectives, I think this is really good because it's not just like arguing for the sake of like hostility. It's actually trying to see how the other person thinks, and I think that's where Jason excels at, is that you come to his podcast and he'll challenge the way you think about something so you can articulate it so that you're thinking through your own argument the right way. So I appreciate that.
All right, man. I appreciate you. Hang back. I'm gonna hit you up after because cool. Because your thing got to upload that we talked about before.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna wrap up here. All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that has been the Black Muse Podcast. As usual, I am your host, Jason Muse, aka the Black Muse. Let me cue the music. There we go. My outro music. I was like wondering where it's at. Yeah, that was a great episode. As bro said, I like these deep dives. I like being able to pick people's brains, challenge people. And at the end of the day, I guess we could just agree to disagree. Although I think that bro lost. And now that he can't defend himself, I'm just gonna talk shit now. No, I'll just play. But yeah, it was a very fun episode. I like doing it. And as you guys can see, I just want to shout out, show shameless plug. I am the founder of a new LLC called the Black Muse Global Network. We're doing things big. Not really. It's very small, very starting at humble beginnings. But you got to start somewhere. One day it's gonna be global for real. But yeah. Until next time. Peace.